Chapter 668. Wait, I'm here to deliver something. Let me in. Tangan turned his head in surprise, only to see Claude at the door. He had panda eyes, and his face was green and black. He looked anxious and wanted to rush into the room, but he was held back by the royal guards. Claude, what are you doing here? The director's face darkened, and he reprimanded in a low voice. Matthew's face also darkened. You old. You still dare to come here? Tangan's eyes flashed as he looked at Claude's anxious expression that couldn't hide his fear. He muttered to himself for a moment, and suddenly understood. Obviously, there was something wrong with the few apprentices here, and they must have passed on the conversation between him and Matthew to Claude. As such, Claude, who knew that he was in big trouble, naturally came to try to save himself. The royal guard saw that the person inside did indeed know Claude, and Lan Sha frowned and waved his hand. So they let Claude go and let him enter the room. Claude limped to the center of the room and bowed to Lan Sha in the northern wilderness. Your Highness, I'm here to deliver the crystal ores. I didn't know that Sir Matthew's experiment was to develop something for your Highness, and I accidentally took the crystal ores this morning, and there was a small misunderstanding with Sir Matthew. In short, it's all my fault. Here, I would like to sincerely apologize to Sir Matthew. He turned around and bowed 90 degrees, looking at the startled Matthew with a pleading expression, looking extremely pitiful. Why else would they say that life is like a play, and it all depends on acting skills? Tangan couldn't help but laugh when he saw this, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Claude had lived for most of his life, and his face, dignity, and so on were completely fleeting. Look at his sincere expression. Look at his pitiful little eyes. He was completely at the level of an Oscar. It was just a pity that Matthew had a feud with him for more than 10 years, and even completely shed all pretense of cordiality just now. How could he not know Claude's nature? And how could Claude put himself in danger for the sake of some compatriots? Coming back to his senses, he immediately flew into a rage. You're playing. Looking at Lan Sha, Matthew took back his words and said angrily, Clorin, stop pretending. Where's the arrogance you had when you were clamoring to kill me? He turned around and bowed to Lan Sha. Your Highness, please don't listen to this villain's one-sided story. This morning, he clearly snatched that batch of crystal ores on purpose to obstruct Sir Arthur's progress in developing glasses for you. Oh, is that so? Lan Sha responded noncommittally. He glanced at the two of them and then glanced at Tangan. The latter, on the other hand, stood quietly by the side with his glasses in hand, looking as if it had nothing to do with him. It wasn't that Tangan didn't want to help Matthew, but he knew that Lan Sha had an almost monstrous IQ. As long as she looked at him for a while, she would naturally be able to tell who was real and who was fake. And if he interfered rashly, it wouldn't be good, because now Tangan couldn't figure out what he was like in Lan Sha's heart. Your Highness, he's lying. Seeing that the tender card didn't work, Clorin's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of fierceness. After a flash, he sighed helplessly to Matthew. Sigh, you and I have worked together for so many years. Although there are usually some small conflicts, I have always regarded you as a friend. I didn't expect you to resent me so much. He shook his head in disappointment, then turned to Lan Sha and said, Your Highness, in fact, this is just a misunderstanding. I didn't expect it to end up like this. I also didn't expect that Sir Matthew, his fingers trembled and he choked. He just grabbed such a small problem and wanted to kill me. What? I want to kill you? Matthew's face was full of absurdity when he heard this, and he almost went berserk. Acting and interpersonal communication were not his strong points. If he was in the modern world, he would be the kind of diligent and serious researcher. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a low-level alchemist who didn't even have his own laboratory. Tangan couldn't help but shake his head when he saw this. He sighed that this combat power was too weak and couldn't be counted on at all. He looked up at Lan Sha and handed over the glasses again. Let's put this aside for now, Your Highness Lan Sha. It's more important to try on the glasses. Before Lan Sha nodded and stretched out his hand, Clorin, who looked innocent and regretful, jumped out again and gave Tang in a subtle stare. Wait a minute. Clorin didn't dare to let Lan Sha wear the glasses, because once the experiment was successful, Tang In and Matthew would be the great contributors to solving the eye disease that had troubled His Highness Lan Sha for more than 20 years. When that time came, Matthew would only need to take credit and mention this matter again. Wouldn't Clorin be in trouble? Tang In, of course, knew what Clorin was thinking, and he also praised the other party's reaction speed. The corner of his mouth rose, and he said with a smile, "Oh, I wonder if Sir Clorin has anything else to say? You old man, what's your intention for repeatedly stopping His Highness from wearing glasses?" This was Andre's support. "I'm thinking for the safety of His Highness." At this time, Clorin also threw caution to the wind. He braced himself and said anxiously, "Your Highness, this Arthur has only been in the craftsman's office for a day or two. He doesn't know anything about alchemy. Now that he suddenly took out this gadget that no one has ever seen before, who knows if it's dangerous for you?" That's right. Alchemy items are really hard to say. Also, who has heard of something that can be seen clearly by someone with a natural eye disease? No. And this Arthur, why haven't I heard of this person in the craftsman's office? Could it be that he's only been here for a day or two? Isn't that just nonsense? It had to be said that these words sounded very reasonable, and the surrounding people couldn't help but agree. Andre, who was about to throw Clorin out, couldn't help but hesitate. It wasn't that he doubted Tang In, but that protecting Lan Sha was indeed his duty. Therefore, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. Tang In's expression didn't change. He nodded and said, "Well, it makes sense." "What do you mean?" "Check." Clorin narrowed his eyes and said without hesitation, "For this kind of unknown thing, we must conduct a detailed inspection from all aspects in order to avoid possible dangers. As long as we get through today, I don't care if this thing is dangerous or not." "That's right." Tang In once again nodded thoughtlessly and handed the glasses over. "But a detailed inspection is too slow. Since Sir Clorin is skeptical, why don't you try it on yourself?" "Arthur, no." Matthew was shocked. What good could the glasses be in Clorin's hands? Nitpicking was a light matter. Even if there was no problem, he could still find a problem. He immediately wanted to dissuade Clorin, but he was stopped by Tang In's eyes after spitting out a few words. Clorin was overjoyed. Good. Let this old man try it on for His Highness. He didn't forget to secretly show off and then took the glasses. Don't be in a hurry to try it on." Tang In said with a smile. "You don't believe in the effect of the glasses, but Elderma does. Why don't we make a small bet? Of course, since it's a bet, there must be a prize. Well, if the final result is that you lose, then give the position of the area's person in charge to Elderma. What do you think?" This was Tang In's style of doing things, harming others for his own benefit. Previously, he let Clorin successfully intercept the item and didn't attack because he was digging a hole to harm others. Now, he took this opportunity to get a good position for Matthew, who was on good terms with him. That was for his own benefit. Of course, Tang In glanced at Matthew, who was stunned by the bet, and looked indifferent. The opportunity had been given. Whether you can grasp it or not depends on yourself. Clorin was furious when he heard that Tang In wanted to rob him of the promotion opportunity that he had obtained through flattery. His eyes were fierce, but he immediately reacted. "Yes, once the matter of me causing trouble for His Highness Lan Sha is exposed, I can forget about this position. Since I'm going to be unlucky anyway, I might as well take a gamble." However, although he had made up his mind, the old and cunning Clorin didn't immediately agree. Instead, he suddenly put on the glasses cunningly. He wanted to see the effect, first to be in an invincible position. Tang In smiled gently and didn't stop him. The people on the side were a little nervous. Their bodies were stiff as they stared at Clorin's expression and movements. Lan Sha also narrowed her eyes and watched, her slender fingers unconsciously intertwined together. In fact, from the beginning, she didn't care about the so-called dispute between Matthew and Clorin. The reason why she waited patiently until now was to see if Tang In, who always did something unexpected, could give her a surprise this time and solve the problem that had troubled her for more than 20 years. Clorin, who was wearing glasses, blinked and seemed to be a little surprised. Then he looked at the experimental table on the left and Lan Sha and the others on the right. He hesitated, raised his hand in front of his eyes, and waved. Andre couldn't help but frown and scold. F***CK. Are you done yet? How is the effect? Say something. Just as he said a word, Clorin's body suddenly staggered. He quickly took off his glasses and seemed to be a little dizzy. Then he took a deep breath. Nothing could be seen from his wrinkled, old face. It seems that I'm a little old. I just stood for a while, and I feel a little uncomfortable. After a pause, he looked at Tang-un and said, Well, since you want that position so much, I'll accompany you to the end. But according to the rules of the bet, if I'm lucky enough to win, then Sir Matthew has to leave the workshop. This condition isn't too much, right? Haha, only a fool wouldn't bet. What stupid glasses, I was worried about it before. There's no need to find fault with them at all. After wearing them, my vision will be blurry and it will cause dizziness. I'll see how you die later. Twain pursed his lips when he heard that. He was too lazy to pay attention to Claude, who was still putting on an act. He turned his gaze to Matthew. Idiot, if you're not nearsighted, do you think you can see clearly with your glasses on? I'll bet. Although he felt something was wrong from the secret of Clorin, Matthew finally chose to believe in Tang-un. He hammered his palm and agreed loudly. Ha! Good. Refreshing. Claude, who had been staring at Twain because he was worried about exposing his joy, suddenly raised his head and laughed. He turned his head and looked at Matthew with the attitude of a winner. He did not mention the danger and directly handed the glasses to Lan Sha. Your Highness, in order to expose this ridiculous farce and to prove my innocence, please wear them and let someone give up. Lan Sha took the glasses but did not immediately put them on. Instead, he frowned and looked at Tang-un with some inquiry in his eyes. Then he waved his hand and said coldly, You all get out. It's okay. This chick still has some conscience. Tang-un certainly knew the intention of Lan Sha's move. It was nothing more than giving him a way out. He waved his hand and said, Just wear them here. Let someone give up. Similar words immediately made Matthew's old face turn black. He glared fiercely at Tang-un. Pretend, keep pretending. You'll cry later. Lan Sha chuckled and no longer hesitated. He raised his hand and put on the glasses. The two brackets went through his hair and fixed on his small and exquisite ears. When he looked up, his clear eyes suddenly froze and his delicate body trembled slightly. In an instant, the room was silent and snow was slowly falling outside the window. Ha, it's coming, it's coming. Clorin's mouth gradually cracked open and the wrinkles on his old face piled up like a chrysanthemum. Matthew's body tensed up, his lips trembled, and his right hand subconsciously made a prayer gesture in front of his chest. Well, everyone's attention was now on Lan Sha. Otherwise, with this prayer gesture of the Temple of Light, he would be finished. Tang-un's expression was still as usual. He looked into Lan Sha's eyes and broke the silence. This is a 500-degree lens. If it's still a little blurry, you can change it to a clearer one. No need. Shaking his head slightly, Lan Sha stared at Tang-un's face. It seemed like it was the first time she knew him, but it also seemed like a flower was about to bloom. She lightly opened her red lips and said, I feel very good now. Tang-un's cheeks twitched under this seemingly sharper gaze. He looked away and spread his hands. Then congratulations. Thank you. Lan Sha's eyes drooped slightly. Then, under the incredulous gaze of the surrounding people, she bowed to Tang-un in a royal etiquette. Her long skirt spread out like an ink lotus. Getting up, Lan Sha turned to look at the stunned Matthew and said indifferently, Now, you're the person in charge of the craftsman's area. I don't accept this. Before the stuttering Matthew could say a complete sentence, Claude, who finally reacted, shouted with a face full of unwillingness, Those glasses obviously can't see anything, and I'll feel dizzy when I wear them. How can they win? Lan Sha coldly glanced at him. No, I saw it very clearly, including your disgusting face. No, it's not like this. Claude roared hoarsely, his face full of despair. You're lying, right? Tell me, what benefits did they give you? I understand now. You all colluded together to lie to me. The roaring suddenly stopped. Andre's face was livid. He grabbed Claude's neck and raised him up like he was pinching a chicken. F***, how dare you slander His Highness? I think you old dog are tired of living. He turned around and walked out of the door. Let's go. We need to find a place to have a good chat. Chapter 669. In the empty laboratory, the two stood in front of the open back window and were silent. It wasn't a solemn silence, but the kind of quiet atmosphere that people would enjoy when they were alone. The cold wind took the opportunity to roll in, stirring the pure, white, fluffy cloak and making it flutter. The snowflakes drifted quietly and occasionally fell on the two, but they quickly melted into a light freshness. He stretched out his slender, jade-like palm and caught a few snowflakes. I still remember when I was young, it also snowed. At that time, I had a few playmates, Anne, Anna, and the others. We climbed the highest wall of the castle and looked into the distance together. At that time, I said that the snowflakes were so beautiful that they dyed the world white. But they said that it wasn't like that. There were many places in the distance that could be seen with other colors, such as green ancient trees, gray roofs that were not covered, moving crowds. There were many, many. They pointed them out to me one by one, but unfortunately, in my eyes, they were all white. The large snowflakes in his palm turned into a few water droplets and sprinkled down. From then on, I knew that the world I saw was different from them. After a pause, Lan Sha raised his finger and pushed the frame of his glasses. He turned to look at Tang In. Thank you. Thank you for letting me see the world clearly. Tang In spread his hands. In fact, you have already thanked me. No one will complain about having too much to thank. Lan Sha said calmly. I have a question. Just now, Claude and I were wearing the same glasses. Why did he say that he couldn't see and felt dizzy? It's very simple, because he is not nearsighted. Don't ask me what nearsightedness is. It's a bit complicated to explain. In short, you just need to know that glasses are only suitable for people like you. Tang In waved his hand to disperse the snowflakes that gradually accumulated on the window lattice and continued. Of course, when you start wearing it, although you will feel better than ordinary people, you may feel a little dizzy after a while. You can only rely on yourself to slowly adapt. Lan Sha nodded gently. Is there anything else I need to pay attention to? Let me think. You need to prepare a piece of high-quality silk cloth and wipe the lenses often. Also, you are only wearing a simple frame now. I will give a more convenient frame blueprint to Elder Ma, and he will find a way to make it. If you have any preferred colors, you can also look for him to dye them. Lan Sha glanced at Tang In. That's fine. We can leave the follow-up work to others. You just have to be responsible for getting the telescope out again. She rubbed her forehead and said, Big sister, these are two different concepts. It won't be so fast. Aren't they all lenses? It's easy for you to say. Void-level martial artists and primary martial artists are still human. Tang In touched his nose and was quite speechless. Lan Sha slightly frowned when he heard this. He tilted his head, and a cold light flashed across the mirror, covering his limpid eyes. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that you are lying to me. F***, you can even see that. Tang In's expression did not change, but he felt a little regretful in his heart. Originally, this chick's observation was sharp enough. Now, with the addition of the glasses, the effect was absolutely like adding wings to a tiger. Even with his disguise skills, he was now under a lot of pressure. In fact, Lan Sha's words just now were not wrong. They were indeed all lenses. It was not difficult for Tang In to make a telescope. But now there was no clue about the antidote, and the escape plan was still on hold. How could he take out the telescope so easily? It must be known that the principle of putting away the bough after the birds have outlived their usefulness was the same everywhere. Lie to you? Why do I feel that you are lying to me more? Tang In's skill of changing the topic had reached the realm of perfection. I have made the thing for you, but what about the antidote? Shouldn't you get to me too? This is not urgent. As long as you don't try it randomly, the poison will not break out in a short time. Lan Sha did not doubt him. When you have developed the telescope, we will talk about this problem again. Tang In suddenly frowned and squinted at Lan Sha. If you want to gain something without risking anything, then unfortunately, you have chosen the wrong target. My patience is not very good. As if he did not feel the slight threat, Lan Sha looked calm. Don't worry. In terms of value alone, I will not let you die easily. Of course, this was not the answer Tang wanted to get, but he also knew that he had to eat one bite at a time. For an opponent like Lan Sha, he really could not rush. His tone was a little slower. You just said that the poison will not break out in a short time. So this is a slow-acting poison? Is there a specific time limit? Lan Sha heard the words, and the corners of his mouth curved into a smile. He slightly raised his head. Guess. Damn, this is not a hint at all. Do you have to be so vigilant? Tang's eyes twitched a few times. He was speechless. He sighed. Well, we will talk about the poison later. Now I have something I need your help with. I heard that the largest library in the Imperial City is in the Imperial Palace Castle. I want to go in and take a look. First throw out an impossible condition. After being rejected, then put forward the actual condition that you really want. Often, it will be accepted. This was a little trick in negotiations. Tang was undoubtedly using this now. Lan Sha heard the words and pondered for a few seconds. His eyes flashed. You want to enter the library and find clues about the antidote? That's why I hate dealing with smart people the most. Fortunately, I am not stupid. Wow, amazing. I didn't expect you to see through me, even though I hid so deeply. Tang made an exaggerated expression and then rolled his eyes. He spread his hands and said, Then, how many books are there in the library? Uncounted, as vast as the sea. Tis TSK. Then what do you think the probability of me finding clues about the antidote is? As vast as the sea. Even if I find it one day, I am afraid I will be too old. Shaking his head, Tang laughed at himself. To tell you the truth, I want to learn the language of the northern wilderness. Of course, if I accidentally find clues about the antidote, then don't blame me. Lan Sha's eyes drooped slightly and fell into a state of contemplation. To be honest, she did not believe Tang's excuse of learning the language of the northern wilderness. At least, she did not completely believe it. But the truth was just as Tang had said. The books in the library were piled up like a mountain. Even if one read 10 lines at a glance, it would take a very long time to finish reading them, not to mention carefully searching for clues about the antidote. Perhaps he still hasn't given up. This is his style of doing things. Well, if I can use an illusory clue to divert most of his attention to the book collection pavilion, this isn't a bad idea. Thinking of this, Lan Sha simply nodded. You helped me make the glasses, so I will help you with this matter. This requires some procedures. I will give the order. Tomorrow, you can freely enter and leave the library in the castle. Hearing this, Tang was overjoyed. Haha, then thank you. Mortals are mortals in the end. No matter how much intelligence they have, so what? I have a cheat. You are welcome, so be it. Taking a few steps back, Lan Sha could not help but shiver because of the bone-piercing cold wind and snow. Seeing this, Tang closed the window and looked up and down at Lan Sha's corset floral dress. He could not help but shake his head. I really don't understand what you women are thinking. Wearing a dress in this kind of weather? Hearing this, Lan Sha's eyes flickered. She seemed a little annoyed, but soon returned to normal. She lightly said, It is necessary for my identity. After saying this, she turned and left the laboratory, leaving with Andre, Simone, and the others who were waiting outside. Not long after Lan Sha left, Matthew slipped in and came up to Tang to give him a big bow. However, Tang already knew this would happen, so he stepped forward to support him and used words to seal his mouth. Helping Matthew was something that Tang could do in passing. Of course, in his heart, he more or less had the idea of forming a good relationship, mainly because he valued the ability of the brand's circle to gather information. One must know that it was equivalent to having many more spies in the Imperial City. After 1,000 words of thanks, Matthew came over with a strange expression. Arthur, do you know what happened to Clowen? Dead? Tang casually guessed. With Andre's means, if he directly stabbed Clowen, then Clowen would be considered lucky. Not yet, but soon. Matthew's eyes narrowed. His expression was both excited and sympathetic. He was first beaten up, then stripped naked and tied to a wooden stake in the open space. When I passed by just now, he was completely covered in snow. I'm afraid he will be frozen to death. Imperial Palace Castle. After dealing with a bunch of affairs, the Empress and Serene walked out of the side hall and stopped at a place where the snow couldn't fall, looking into the distance. This was considered a break midway. Elansha, surprised, the Empress squinted her eyes. In the distance, she saw Lansha's figure appear behind an arched door in the snow. She seemed to have seen this, paused, and bowed from afar. She didn't have the intention to come over and continue to walk away. Hee, are you still angry with me? Fortunately, I bowed. Well, it's a bit strange. How could she suddenly see me from such a distance? And this dress seems to be, it's the 20th birthday gift you gave to His Highness Lan Shah, Celine said with certainty. It's really this dress. The Empress suddenly understood and then wondered, but didn't she say that this dress is beautiful, but it's very cumbersome to wear, so she doesn't like it? Maybe His Highness likes to be beautiful for a while. Well, it's possible. Lan Shah's grown up. Chapter 670. The next morning, Tang did not go to the craftsman's office with Matthew. Instead, he got off at the street closest to the palace and walked alone. When he arrived at the main gate of the castle, Andre had been waiting for a long time. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Andre tossed Tang in a wolf head token that seemed to be made of wood and iron, and brought Tang in through the main entrance of the palace. I have already informed my brothers. In the future, you can use this token to enter and leave this place. Of course, there will be some simple searches. This is the rule. I hope Mr. Arthur can understand. This is what I should do. I can understand. Tang Yin waved his hand and sincerely thanked him. Andre, thank you for this. He shook his head and laughed. Haha, don't thank me. The Royal Library Pavilion has a very high status in the Northern Wilderness. I don't have the ability to let you come and go freely. If you want to thank someone, thank Her Highness. She asked the Empress for this opportunity. Tang Yin nodded. Although both sides took what they needed, he made glasses for Lan Shah, and Lan Shah gave him this opportunity. It seemed very fair, but he had to admit that the Royal Library Pavilion was much more important than a pair of glasses. He took a big advantage this time. Oh, by the way, I heard that the Empress was very happy that you cured Her Highness's eye disease. She also said that she would give you some rewards, such as a leisurely position or something. You are a Bran, which was very rare before. But it seems that Her Highness has other arrangements, so it was blocked. After a pause, Andre patted Tang Yin on the shoulder and said with some envy, In short, Mr. Arthur, you are rich this time. I hope so. If it really happens, I will treat you to a drink. Although Tang Yin did not care about the so-called rewards, he certainly would not show it in front of Andre. He pretended to be overjoyed. Okay, then I will wait. After chatting and laughing for a while, Andre also vaguely reminded Tang Yin to pay attention to some things. Although the library was located in the outer city of the castle, this was still the castle of the Imperial Palace. Therefore, there were rules such as not being able to walk around casually, especially not being able to enter the interior of the Imperial Palace. Once violated, the consequences would be unpredictable, to put it bluntly. Although Tang Yin's strength was very high, there were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers in the Imperial Palace. There were many experts who were stronger than him, so he should not think about some thoughts that he should not have. When Tang Yin heard these words, he naturally agreed. He was not so arrogant as to think that he was the strongest in the world. It should be known that previously, when he had been playing chess with the Empress, those few powerful auras were enough to kill him several times over if they joined forces. Besides, he was here to find the antidote and run away, not to assassinate the Northern Wilderness Empress like a hot-blooded Bran youth. Of course, he wouldn't deliberately cause trouble. In the wind and snow, the two of them walked for about 10 minutes. Suddenly, Andre pointed to a white stone building that occupied a large area not far away and said that it was the library. Perhaps because of his identity or because of the ban, Andre did not directly send Tang into the library. He only said that he could not go any further and asked Tang in to go there by himself. From this point, perhaps one could see the high status of knowledge books in the northern wilderness. After a simple farewell, Tang in continued to move toward the library. When he came to the stairs of the building, he paused, lowered his head, and swept away the thick snow. Only then did he realize that the ground here was paved with pure white stone slabs that were as white as jade. Tang in remembered that when he first entered the castle, the ground was mostly gray and yellow stone slabs, which were obviously different from here. A library is so grand. Tang in secretly curled his lips and looked around. There were no guards in sight, which was a little strange. However, these thoughts only flashed through Tang In's mind for a moment. He stepped on the stairs and stomped a few times in front of the door, shaking off the snow that stuck to his clothes and shoes. He walked through the half-closed door. What entered his eyes was just a simple hall with nothing placed there. There was a long corridor on the wall in front of him, and he could vaguely see some light at the end. Without hesitation, Tang In directly stepped into the passageway. Because the surroundings were too quiet, Tang In subconsciously restrained his aura and footsteps and silently passed through it. After walking for about a minute, the light at the exit in front of him became brighter. His nose could faintly smell some dusty books. As soon as he stepped out of the corridor, Tang An's eyes suddenly opened up. Above the roof, there was a huge, illuminating crystal every few dozen meters, illuminating the place brightly and revealing every detail. In the empty hall below, other than dozens of hugged white jade columns, there were rows of wooden bookshelves neatly arranged as far as the eye could see, like elite soldiers being inspected. It was a magnificent sight. Well, I have to admit that the northern wilderness does have a very impressive library. Rubbing his hair, Tang In felt a little emotional and a headache. This was because the magnificent scene in front of him probably meant that he would have to stay here for a long time, even with the help of the system. He shifted his gaze to the left. About 30 meters away from the exit of the corridor, there was a long circular wooden table that looked a little like the counter of a tavern. The reason why Tang In looked over was because there was a white-haired, balding old man lying on the table. It was unknown whether the library was not open to the public or because Tang In had left too early, but there was no one else here except for him and the old man. Just as Twain's line of sight shifted over, the prostrate man's white hair suddenly moved, as if he was suddenly awakened, and he slowly raised his head. It was clearly a quiet and windless environment, but Tang In's coat suddenly flew back high, and his expression changed drastically. Buzz! With a soft hum, the dagger popped out, and with a phantom, it was placed horizontally in front of his chest. His body swayed slightly in an instant, as if he could jump out in all directions at any time. Abran, with a soft sound of surprise, the fluttering coat slowly fell back down, and finally stopped, as if everything that had just happened was just an illusion. But of course, Tang In did not think so. Cold sweat condensed on his temples, and his long and narrow eyes almost narrowed into slits. He stared at the old man from the northern wilderness who had raised his head. For the first time in this strange world, Tang In had never felt that death was so close to him like just now. It was so close that he could touch it with his hand, so close that he could smell it with his nose. Moreover, this kind of aura of death, this kind of overwhelming power that was like a mountain collapsing in front of him, made Tang In, for the first time in his life, unable to summon any thoughts of resistance. If he did not know that in front of this kind of power, turning around meant immediate death, he would have turned around and left without saying a word. Don't be nervous, little boy from the brand. It's just that I haven't seen someone so close to me in a long time, and I haven't noticed it yet, so I'm just overreacting. Overreacting, just overreacting? Tang In pursed his suddenly dry lips, and without saying a word, he put away the dagger and slowly straightened his body. In front of this kind of power, it was ridiculous to assume a posture of resistance. Of course, this action did not mean that he had completely given up. It was just to avoid any possible conflict. TSK, strange. The old man from a northern wilderness sized up Tang in and clicked his tongue in wonder. You should have a very strong power in your body, but I can't see through it. It's really strange. Little boy, what kind of fighting aura do you cultivate? Of course, Tang In understood what the old man from the northern wilderness meant by strange. He cultivated the system's blood energy, not the other world's fighting aura. The blood energy was completely generated out of thin air, like rootless duckweed, and naturally could not be seen through by outsiders. From another point of view, the old man from a northern wilderness could vaguely sense the level of power in his body. It was really frighteningly high. At least, it was something that Tang Yin, who had been in this strange world for so long, had never seen before. Naturally, Tang In could not tell others about the existence of the blood energy, so after pondering for a while, he shook his head firmly. At the same time, his body was like a full moon, and he secretly prepared to retreat. But the old man from a northern wilderness did not get angry after being rejected. He nodded. Yes, it's about the inheritance, so of course you won't tell. But it's a pity. It's the first time I've seen someone at your age who can condense their fighting aura to such a degree. Oh, it's the second time, also from the brand. But he's very old, and the way he condensed it is different from yours. He converged it on his sword. After saying something irrelevant, the old man from a northern wilderness narrowed his eyes again at Tang Yin. After a moment, he shook his head. No, the murderous aura on you is too strong. He probably won't accept you as a disciple. And a bit of a hateful aura. Light tracking magic? Ha, little boy, it seems that you're not a good person in the brand either. Chapter 671. Tang In had been in the other world for more than 2 years. During this time, he had been to the south, the north, the battlefields, and even revolted. He had a wealth of experience. Among all the people he had met, the most powerful one was undoubtedly Zhuo Fan, who usually kept a low profile and didn't have the slightest sense of existence. But once he made a move, he would shine brightly. But now, Tang In looked at the pair of old, cloudy eyes in front of him that seemed to see through him with just a squint. His previous understanding was undoubtedly overturned. It was one thing to see the murderous aura, although Tang In thought that he had restrained it well. After all, the foundation of the 1,000 kills was there. It was not impossible for some old guys to see through it. But the Temple of Light's tracking magic. It had been a month. How could they still see through it? Not to mention Tang In's shock, the attitude of the old man in the northern wilderness suddenly improved after seeing this. This was normal. No one in the northern wilderness would have a good impression of the Temple of Light. He asked with a smile, "Do you know Wu Ding?" Tang In frowned. "Wu Ding? Who's that?" The old man in the northern wilderness opened his mouth in surprise and stared at Tang In's expression, as if to confirm that he was not lying. After a while, he sighed. That old guy's been so low-key all these years. Even you, a brand, don't know him. Sword God Wu Ding, the guy who is known as the #1 warrior in the brand. Now that you mention it, I do have some impression. After all, he was known as the #1 warrior in the brand. Tang In had heard of him a few times before, but most of it probably came from bards and noisy taverns, so he didn't pay much attention to it. He shook his head, a little speechless. I can now be sure that you have no relationship with Wu Ding. Obviously, the old man in the northern wilderness was also testing him just now. However, Tang In really didn't know, so it didn't matter. Looking at the other party's dispirited look after confirming, Tang In's heart skipped a beat and he asked, "Are you a heaven stage martial artist?" The so-called heaven rank martial artist was naturally a martial artist one realm higher than void rank. According to Tang In's knowledge, cultivators at this level were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chilan horns in the entire Caesar mainland. The old man in the northern wilderness had only reacted subconsciously, but it had made Tang In feel so much pressure. This naturally made him think of the legendary heaven stage warrior. To be honest, after Tang In successfully killed Yemo, although he often said that it was a fluke, he was actually a little arrogant in his heart. Recently, he had been a little lazy in his training because of this. He always felt that his current strength was enough for him to traverse the continent. Even if he encountered something he couldn't defeat, he could at least dodge it. However, the appearance of this old man in the northern wilderness had undoubtedly shattered this thought, and a sense of danger once again descended upon him. Therefore, he now needed to confirm the old man's level, so that he would have a visible target in the future. Heaven's stage martial artist? Heh, that's what you brand call it. After a non-committal reply, the old man in the northern wilderness opened his mouth and yawned loudly. He lost interest in continuing the conversation and waved his hand and lay down again. Take whatever book you want to read. Just don't bring it out. You should be a heaven stage martial artist. Tang In pondered over that sentence and secretly guessed. Immediately, his spirit was lifted. He clenched his fist and asked, "Sorry to disturb you again. I want to learn the language of the northern wilderness. May I ask where such books are?" The old man didn't seem to dislike Tang In very much. He didn't raise his head and pointed to a bookshelf not far away. Tang In bowed slightly. "Thank you. Before there was a conflict, it was necessary to have a basic respect for experts. This was the way to survive." Frankly speaking, Tang In didn't expect to meet such a terrifying expert just by looking for a place to read. Fortunately, the ending wasn't bad. Because of the short time they had spent together, Tang In didn't know the nature of the old man in the northern wilderness. However, at least from the current situation, it seemed that the old man didn't intend to attack him. At this moment, Tang In finally understood why there was not a single guard on the periphery of the library, despite its lofty status. With the old man in the northern wilderness guarding it, it would be a real tragedy if anyone dared to come and cause trouble. Walking to the bookshelf that the old man in the northern wilderness pointed to, Tang In roughly skimmed through it and found that most of the books here were indeed similar to translations. With such a huge amount of information, even an extremely smart person would need a few months to completely grasp this language. It was undeniable that Tang In was definitely a little smart, but compared to people like Lan Sha, who were almost demonic in their intelligence, there was still a big gap. However, he had a unique advantage, the assassin system, so he didn't need to spend a few months to grasp this vague language. He squeezed his fingers. "Let's start. After this meal, the system shouldn't need to frequently search for books and information anymore." He picked up a book. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the silent space, the soft and rapid sound of pages flipping sounded without any pause. Not long after, the old man in the northern wilderness looked up and frowned slightly. He then shook his head and waved his hand. The surrounding ripples vibrated, and a faint light barrier that was almost invisible to the naked eye enveloped the surroundings. Immediately, the annoying sound of pages being flipped was cut off. He smacked his lips in satisfaction, then crossed his arms and laid down on his stomach again, revealing his somewhat bald white hair. Tang In didn't know that he had almost offended the old man. Now his eyes were dull, and he had already entered the realm of forgetting himself and the world around him. He only knew how to mechanically pick up books, flip through them, and continue to pick up another book. His brain was constantly ringing. Ding! The translation of the daily language of the Horde and the brand has been completed. Ding! The translation of the etiquette of the brand has been completed. Ding! The translation of the most common slang of the brand has been completed. Subtitle: Kill if you hear it. Completed. After about half an hour, Tang In finally finished recording all the books on the bookshelf. He shook his head and, without hesitation, directly called out in his heart, "The assassin system." The scene changed instantly. Tang In was in the system space, which was also decorated as a library. He looked around, but there were rows of books in the style of the modern world, and there were so many books that he couldn't see the old butler at all. He simply shouted, "Old butler, this time the information is complete, right? How is it? Did you find any information about the poison?" Wait a moment. The old butler's figure appeared out of thin air, and his expression was calm. "Wait until the system generates logic from the recorded words, then you'll know the answer." "Then when should I?" Before he finished speaking, the system's synthetic voice sounded. "Ding! A complete language has been successfully recorded. Please name it." "Ah, man language." Tang In was a little stunned when he heard this. He sighed with emotion at the power of the system and answered subconsciously. Naming successful. Tang and was delighted. Bring up the information of the previously recorded poison and find the poison that matches the characteristics of the toxins in my body. Please wait a moment. Before Tang and could make a prayer gesture, only 2 seconds later, the synthetic voice sounded again. There is no poison that matches the poison that the host is infected with. What? Tang and suddenly jumped up when he heard this. His expression was one of shock and disbelief. He was a little dazed. How could this be? This should be the most complete poison formula in the northern wilderness. As expected, the old butler's expression did not change. Based on Lan Shah's previous performance, this poison is not simple. It's not surprising that it was not placed in the craftsman's office. Easy for you to say. It seems like all my previous efforts were in vain. Tang could not help but curse. He squatted down with his head in his hands and said weakly, "Old butler, give me a suggestion. First, either the fish dies or the net splits. Second, log all the books in the library into the system. With such a huge amount of information, it should not be difficult to find the poison in your body." This was the truth. This poison was so powerful. As long as it was not newly developed, there would definitely be some clues left in the history books. Tang raised his hand and patted the side of his face. Thinking of the spectacular bookshelf he had just seen in the real world, his face could not help but darken. Damn it, that's what you get for having such a cheap mouth. You really want to scan everything in? You might as well kill me. Of course, this was just a complaint. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, Tang would not give up easily. Not to mention the suggestion in front of him. Although it would take a lot of time, the hope was not small. He quickly adjusted himself and stood up. Tang pursed his lips and said, "Old butler, teach me the man language." This was the awesome skill that allowed Tang to surpass all the other geniuses. Now that the system had completely grasped the information of the barbarian language, Tang only needed to pay a certain amount of blood chi to be able to instantly learn this language. F***CK. If I had this skill in the real world, how could I become a third-rate student that was not loved by my grandmother, not loved by my uncle, and kicked out by my employer? Chapter 672. Over the next few days, Tang En's life in the northern wilderness gradually stabilized. Other than occasionally going to the craftsman's workshop to guide Matthew on the improvement of the frame, he spent the rest of his time in the library, carrying out a massive book-stealing project. Tang had already learned the northern wilderness language through the system. For this, he had paid nearly 3,000 points of blood chi. Fortunately, he had gained a lot from killing Yema, so he did not feel bad about it. Of course, even if he had completely mastered it, Tang usually still spoke the brand language. When he encountered someone speaking the northern wilderness language, he had to put on a blank expression. It could not be helped. His learning progress could not be covered up by words such as smart, fast, and so on. Perhaps he could only be described as super god. Once exposed, it would attract the attention of people with ulterior motives, and then it would be quite troublesome. As for the problem of the poison, Tang had no other way for a while. He could only plunge into the library and search day and night, constantly trying his luck. At this time, Tang finally understood why Lan Shah was still willing to let him enter the library, even though he suspected his motive for reading. With such a vast and endless collection of books, only Tang who had the system, had a chance. If it were someone else, even if they were a monstrous genius with a photographic memory, even if they knew that the poison information was in the books, the only thing they could do was to hold their heads in despair, squat on the ground, and draw circles, of course, in the eyes of Lan Shah, who came over from time to time, Tang who seemed to be rapidly flipping through the books but could not even see a single word clearly, was undoubtedly in despair and crazy. In fact, there were not many people who came to the library every day, especially before. Of course, this was relative to the vast area of the bookshelves. In fact, there were at least 100 people coming in and out of the library every day. They had different identities. Some were apprentices, some were high-ranking people, some were arrogant, and some were tyrannical warriors. But no matter who they were, As long as they stayed in the library for a while, they would find an inexplicable brand. Swish, swish, swish. He quickly flipped through the pages of the books before his eyes. The pages flashed by before his eyes and then closed. Then, with one hand, he put it back to its original position, and, with the other hand, he took out another book. To be honest, the whole set of movements was simple, fast, and flawless. It was a completely fluid operation, which made people gasp in amazement. But what was the use of that? At first, everyone thought that this Bran was looking for a book that he had read before. After all, if that was the case, all he needed to do was look at the title of the book. There was no need to waste time flipping through it. Then, looking at how no matter which book he was reading, his attitude and actions were completely the same, one couldn't help but have a vague feeling. This person seemed to have no purpose, as if he was just flipping through the books for the sake of flipping through them. Was he crazy? Everyone knew that the people of the northern wilderness were aggressive and had bad tempers. Due to various subjective and objective reasons, they were more used to using their fists to reason. Therefore, looking at this crazy Bran who kept making swooshing sounds, the expressions of many people in the northern wilderness turned ugly. Someone immediately went over to remind him. Unfortunately, the Bran seemed to have fallen into a demon's trap. His face was wooden, and his eyes were dull. He didn't pay attention to anyone's reminder at all, and continued to do as he pleased. It seemed that he was very arrogant. Seeing this scene, many of the northern wilderness men who were angry couldn't help but secretly clench their fists. However, this was the Imperial City's library, so naturally, no one dared to take the risk of making a move here. But if they left this place, just as everyone suppressed their anger, rubbed their palms, and waited patiently for the Bran to leave the library, Lan Shah suddenly appeared. This was the palace castle, so it wasn't surprising that His Highness Lan Shah would appear here. However, when everyone saw that Lan Shah didn't stop walking as soon as he came in, he followed the swooshing sounds and walked directly to the Bran's side. After greeting him familiarly, they couldn't help but look at each other, wipe away their cold sweat, and slowly relax their clenched fists. Lan Shah came almost every day and stayed for a long time. With her noble status, she naturally didn't come here to support Tang. She didn't need any excuse. She was also reading, but she would chat with Tang from time to time. What's the point of doing this? This was the question Lan Shah asked on the first day. He came to the library and observed Tang's unique way of reading for a long time. Tang's answer was a little mysterious, too mysterious. Do you believe in intuition? I do. So when I read a book that I really need, it will tell me to stop. Of course, this was Tang's deception, but it could also explain his current actions. Of course, Lan Shah scoffed at this. Although she was not sure if there were any records about the poison in the vast collection of books, she was not sure if there were any records about it. She was sure that Tang was crazy. But this is good too, Lan Shah thought. She was very clear about this Bran style of doing things. It was absolutely impossible for him not to try to escape. Now that he had this extremely elusive goal, on the one hand, it could give him a faint hope, and on the other hand, it could allow him to stay here peacefully for a long time in the future. It was a very good result. Holding the yellowed book, the illuminating crystal emitted a soft light. Not far away was that extremely busy figure. The swooshing sound seemed to never break, just like the sound of flowing water that constantly appeared in the depths of her memory. Ripple-like charm for such a moment. Lan Shah's eyes behind the glasses were a little absent-minded. She wasn't thinking about the embarrassing scene under the water, but she was thinking about a question that she had been thinking about for a long time. How should she deal with him? Of course, this him was Tang. To be honest, she had considered killing him. Regardless of the glasses, binoculars, and so on, just the blasphemous scene under the water was absolutely worth killing. But why did she waver later? Oh, it was that damn green wolf. It was like the will of heaven that tore the goshawk into pieces, and also tore her original intention to kill. Well, it was the will of heaven. It was like that. Having found a suitable reason, Lan Shah couldn't help but feel comfortable in her heart. Unfortunately, good things didn't last long. A scene suddenly flashed through her mind, It was the second time they met after entering the city. In fact, it was only a few days apart. She was choosing clothes in front of the wardrobe, one set after another. Unfortunately, she usually didn't care about clothes, so she couldn't find a suitable one. In the end, she could only pick up the dress that her mother gave her on her 20th birthday. It was said that it was made by a master in brand. It was undeniable that this dress was indeed very beautiful, but it was too cumbersome to wear. She had also clearly expressed that she didn't like it. Well, why did she choose at that time? And it was seen by her mother. Could it be that I like him? Her jade face was solemn, and she frowned in contemplation. Arlan Shah had never been a person who didn't dare to face problems. After coming to this conclusion, she immediately made a series of complicated and precise calculations. For example, would I follow the same path as my mother? Obviously, I wouldn't. I am me, and my mother is my mother. Even if I am my mother, he is not Z. The two of them really couldn't be compared. The difference in appearance was obvious. Moreover, would I betray the royal family for this wretched guy? Obviously, I wouldn't, because, well, since I said he was a wretched guy, it was naturally not worth it. Phew. After a series of strong comparisons, Lan Shah sighed softly, and his heart relaxed a lot. I really don't like him. Thinking like this, he glanced at Tang and again, and suddenly felt that he was not pleasing to the eye. He shook his head. Sure enough, comparisons were odious. After coming to such a final conclusion, Lan Shah suddenly felt that there was no need to stay here any longer. He casually inserted the book into the bookshelf and disdained to greet Tang In, who was beside him. Under the gazes of the surrounding people, whether in the light or in the dark, he leisurely walked out of the library, free and easy. Phew. As soon as Lan Shah left, Ting In, who seemed to be numb and only knew how to constantly flip through books, also let out a light sigh, and his expression relaxed a lot. These few days, because of Lan Shah's existence, he had less trouble. But it had to be said that at the same time, there were also many new troubles. The cause was that someone spread the news that Lan Shah would come here every day, and then the number of people who came to the library increased significantly in the past few days, and most of them were rich and powerful people. The ideas of these people were naturally very obvious. With Lan Shah's noble status and appearance, even if they could not match up to him, it was undoubtedly good for their eyes. What's more, Tang In had received some gossip from Andre, probably because of the betrayal of the Battle Lion tribe, which was originally the most suitable tribe for a marriage alliance with the royal family, undoubtedly had no chance. In addition, a few days ago, the Empress sighed, intentionally or unintentionally, that Lan Shah had grown up, and there were some things that he should consider. Her words were more obscure, but no doubt many people understood. For a time, the situation changed, and Lan Shah became the common goal of all the young people in the northern wilderness who had strength, background, and good looks. Of course, Andre and Tang In said this with a hint of ridicule, half serious and half joking, telling him to be more careful, lest he be plotted against. The most important thing was that once he was plotted against, he should quickly contact them, lest the situation got out of control. And the reason why they were so serious was none other than that every time Lan Shah came to the library, he would go straight to him, chat for a while, and then leave on his own after a while, as if there was no one around. He basically ignored everyone else, and it was obvious that he was specifically targeting Tang In. As a result, Tang In, the brand lunatic who was not liked by anyone to begin with, became the target of public criticism these few days. Some were fierce, some were resentful, some were jealous. Many gazes were directed at him, and even the calm Tang In felt uneasy. He could not help but feel depressed, and secretly sighed that he was unjustly implicated. Tang In could now be sure that all the information about him should have been dug up by many people with ulterior motives, and there was no need to think about keeping a low profile. Fortunately, Lan Shah left earlier than usual today. Tang In felt the heat around him gradually receding, and he could not help but roll his eyes. If he told them that he had kissed Lan Shah and touched her body, would these people's eyes pop out of their sockets? Or would they pop out of their sockets? Of course, this was just a thought, Once this matter was exposed, it was not important how they would react. What was important was that Tang-un was dead meat. In the evening, dusk was approaching. Tang-un put down the last book on the front bookshelf below, pinched the bridge of his nose, and decided to stop stealing books for today. He rested on the spot for a few minutes, and the most important thing was to rest his eyes. Turning around, Tang-in walked to the corridor leading outside the library. When he arrived at the circular wooden platform, the northern wilderness old man who was leisurely reading the travel book rolled his strange eyes and looked at Tang-in with a smile. Hee, little kid, what do you think? Sorry, I really can't say. Tang-in rubbed his hair in distress and shook his head. Since he saw the real strength of the northern wilderness old man, Tang-un had been deeply vigilant, and he basically did not greet him unless it was necessary. He also asked Lan Sha about the old man's identity, but after some indirect questioning, he found that Lan Sha did not know anything, except that he had been in this library for more than 20 years. And they called him Grandpa Bamitu. Other than that, they did not get any other useful information. However, although Tang did not want to provoke the old man from the northern wilderness named Bamitu, he knew that the old man was very interested in him and kept asking him questions. The day before yesterday, he formally proposed an exchange. As long as Tang-in said the name of the cultivation method, he would help Tang-in remove the tracking magic of the Temple of Light. But unfortunately, Tang-in absolutely could not tell outsiders about the existence of the system, so he could only refuse again and again. But Amuda didn't get angry either. He chuckled and said, I admire people with principles because I'm the same. So, I will keep asking. Come on, you're so stubborn, okay? Tang-in criticized in his heart, but on the surface he still bowed and looked extremely humble, and then he directly walked into the passageway and left. Perhaps it was the last madness of the end of winter. The snow that had been falling for almost a week still did not stop, but it was a little weaker, and the shape of goose feathers turned into catkins. Rubbing his hands, Tang-in stepped on the thick snow and quickly walked out of the main gate of the palace castle. But he did not see Andre, probably because he was resting in shifts. At this time, Matthew should have just left the craftsman's office. If he wanted to hitch a ride, Tang-in still needed to walk forward and come to a fork in the road, which was the place where he got off in the morning. There were no buildings around the main gate of the castle. Only when he walked further away could he gradually see some places, such as houses and shops. The Imperial City was the Imperial City after all. Even if the business in the northern wilderness was severely lagging behind, there were signs of prosperity in the center of the Imperial City. Clothing, weapons, and other shops could be seen everywhere. And on the second floor of a two-story tavern, a few young men gathered by the window, absent-mindedly drinking wine. Their eyes occasionally looked through the window in the direction of the fork in the distance, as if they were waiting for something. They were all wearing extremely expensive, luxurious cloaks that were smuggled from the brand. They looked very noble and were undoubtedly the children of the nobles in the city. Why isn't he here yet, Tager? Is your information accurate? After drinking a mouthful of wine, a rough-looking young man with a black beard asked impatiently. Don't worry, I have sent people to investigate for a few days, and the information is absolutely accurate, the young man called Tager said confidently. That's good. I have long found that brand bastard unpleasant to the eye. Unfortunately, he is either at home or in the library, so we can't find a chance to do anything. Although the other young man was also eager to try, he still asked worriedly, I heard that he is one of Prince Lan Sha's people. If we do anything to him, will there be any problems? The young man with a black beard sneered in disdain. He's just a brand bastard that is a little smart. He used some glasses to temporarily gain His Highness' favor. As long as we don't kill him, what problems can there be? You are right. Don't worry. Seeing that the young man still had a worried expression, Tager pointed at his feet and smiled mysteriously. Do you know why I chose to do it here? Isn't it because this is the only way for the brand? Yes and no. Tager narrowed his eyes and pointed at the second floor of the building 100 meters to the left outside the window. The main reason is because someone is sitting there right now. Who? F***CK, Tager. Can you finish your sentence? Togger rolled his eyes at the rough man and shook his head. All right, I will say it directly. Lambit, the son of the berserk eagle, Lambit, is sitting there. Hiss. They all hissed. These young men looked like rich and powerful people, so it was impossible for them not to know the name of the successor of the berserk eagle tribe, Lambit. He was an existence that they could only rely on to survive in the imperial city for a while, so they had to look up to. But what does this have to do with us beating him up? Idiot! Use your brain. Togger scolded with disdain. You should know why Lambit suddenly came to the imperial city, right? That's right. He came for His Highness Lan Shah. Because of the Battle Lion tribe's stupid move, he is now determined to get Lan Shah. But what happened in the past few days? His Highness Lan Shah has been meeting with that brand bastard in private for the past few days. He paused, swept his eyes over the crowd, and smiled. So, if we can perfectly solve this problem in front of him, and then spread the news through some channels, we will gain the friendship of the son of the berserk eagle. The content of these words could not be said to be not tempting, but the few young men who were listening looked at each other with a somewhat strange expression, as if they were unwilling. Togger obviously knew the reason. He swept his eyes over them and shook his head, saying indifferently, everyone, if possible, who wouldn't want to marry His Highness Lan Shah. But the truth is, we don't even have the slightest chance. So, instead of foolishly becoming enemies with a big shot, why don't we recognize the reality and take the initiative to give up and fight for the benefits we can obtain? What do you think? You are right, His Highness Lan Shah isn't someone people like us can think of. Since that's the case, why don't we help Lambit in exchange for some benefits? That's right, I'll do it too. That Bran is here. Chapter 673. We're not there yet. At the intersection, Tangan looked around at the pedestrians and carriages, but he did not see Matthew's ordinary black carriage. He then looked at the road leading to the craftsman's office and was slightly surprised. Because of what happened before, Matthew still respected him very much. So, although Tangan did not request it, Matthew would come here to wait for him after work these few days. It was more or less an agreement. Maybe he was delayed by something. Tangan did not care. He was about to find a place to hide from the wind and snow when his eyelids suddenly twitched. He looked up and saw more than 10 barbarians with unfriendly faces walking toward him. He raised his eyebrows and turned his head. Behind him, there were also some burly men who were clenching their fists and approaching him. Their smiles were somewhat malicious. Arthur? A barbarian asked as he walked toward him. His pronunciation was not very accurate. Trouble has come to me, Tangan grimaced. He guessed that these people simply did not like him. Or was it because of what happened in the library? Or was it because he was a femme fatale? On the surface, he grinned brightly and shook his head. No. His footsteps paused, and the leading man frowned. He looked at Tangan and rubbed his messy hair. You brand people all look the same. It's hard to recognize. He spoke stiffly and intermittently, as if he was having a hard time. Finally, he waved his hand decisively. Forget it. Beat him up. This is the straightforward character of the people in the northern wilderness. They fight directly and basically do not talk nonsense. Tangan sighed and stepped to avoid the man's whistling fist. He grabbed the man's shoulder and dislocated his joint. Then, he grabbed the man's neck and circled around his body like a long spear. In an instant, more than 10 burly men were swept away. Go! With a light shout, he released the man's neck and added a kick. The leading man flew out in an unusually cooperative manner and knocked down a few of his companions who could not dodge in time and pressed them under his body. Ouch! After completing these actions effortlessly, Tangan rubbed his palms in boredom. I still have to wait for the bus. I don't have time to play with you guys today. Let's all go home and find our mothers. Let's go. Tangan indeed had no intention of causing a dispute. He also did not want to know the purpose of these people, or who was behind them. Keeping a low profile before running away was his current principle of doing things. The surrounding burly men looked at each other in dismay. It was unclear whether they understood or not. Well, they probably didn't understand because they had already reached into their waists and pulled out a pig iron short stick. They rushed forward and smashed it down. Glue. Tangan had already learned the barbarian language, so he naturally understood the meaning of beat him to death. He couldn't help but feel a little gloomy. Since you don't want face, I'll give you a slap in the face as soon as possible. With a flash of his body, he disappeared under the dozen or so pig iron sticks. Before the burly barbarians could cry out in alarm, Tang In had already arrived in their midst. He did not flick out his dagger. He simply punched and kicked, borrowing the strength of his opponent. Only the sound of bones breaking could be heard, like beans being fried in a pot. These burly barbarians with rough skin and thick muscles were thrown to the ground. Their limbs were twisted in a weird way, and they howled in pain. It sounded very horrifying. This could be considered a busy street in the Imperial City. Although there were not many pedestrians because dusk was approaching, a large group of pedestrians quickly gathered after the fight began. As mentioned before, the people of the Northern Wilderness were extremely valiant. Fighting on the street was really not a big deal. Even the guards who maintained law and order in the city would not care. Everyone liked to watch a show. In this regard, there was no distinction between the Bran and the Northern Wilderness. However, the people of the Northern Wilderness who had gathered to watch the fight had a strange expression on their faces. They basically did not make any noise in response, and did not display the spirit of watching a show without fear. The reason was simple. If a person of the Northern Wilderness was beating up a Bran, they would naturally clap and cheer. However, when they saw this ordinary Bran beating up dozens of burly men of the Northern Wilderness on the street, other than the initial shock, their faces were burning with shame and anger. They were ashamed because dozens of burly men were beating up one person on the other side. It was an unfair victory, and it was inevitable that they would lose face. They were angry because, even so, they still could not win the fight. Dozens of steps away, on the second floor of the tavern. This Bran scum is actually so skilled. A young man leaned against the window and looked at the conflict on the street. His expression changed slightly. We were careless. Now almost all the people we sent over have been beaten up. What should we do? Damn that Bran scum. How dare he fight back in front of so many people? How dare he? Don't forget, he's now in the good graces of His Highness Lan Shah. It's fine if we teach him a lesson now. If we don't teach him a lesson, not only will we be blamed by His Highness Lan Shah, but we'll also lose face if word gets out. That's enough, everyone, don't panic. Togger's expression was a little ugly. It's my fault for not investigating carefully. This Bran has been very low-key ever since he entered the city and has never fought anyone. No one knew that he had such skills. However, he paused, and the corner of his mouth curled up, revealing a confident expression. Don't worry. In order to be prepared, I specially invited a guest from my family to oversee the situation. I just didn't expect that it would actually come in handy now. As soon as he finished speaking, the intersection dozens of steps away suddenly became chaotic. The onlookers hurriedly retreated in all directions like a school of fish that was startled by a shark. A few people subconsciously turned their heads and saw a bald man who stood out even among the people of the Northern Wilderness. He stepped on the thick snow and slowly walked toward the intersection in the dusk. The wild and violent aura that he constantly emitted made the few people who were dozens of steps away feel their hearts palpitate. This is the guest of my family, Hamba. He was born in the barbarian bear tribe and cultivated in the godly temple of the Wildlands. He once converted the power of a level 4 magical beast, the violent earth bear, into his own. Because of that, his body grew rapidly and his aura became even more imposing. Later, because he killed a few people and caused some trouble, he could only leave his tribe and wander around until he came to the Imperial City. In the end, he chose to join my family. Of course, pause for a while, Togger straightened his body and revealed a somewhat reserved smile. As a condition, it's also an obligation. Those small troubles were naturally wiped away by my family. There were many factors that measured the strength of a family or even a tribe. The strength and number of experts was undoubtedly one of the most important factors. Although Togger spoke casually on the surface, he secretly pointed out the details. For example, Hamba's experience of cultivating in the godly temple of the wildlands, his success in converting the power of a level 4 magical beast, the violent earth bear, and how he killed a few people. Without a doubt, the so-called a few people he killed were definitely wanted criminals of some tribes. With the accumulation of these details, the image of a tyrannical warrior and a family that couldn't be underestimated was formed. He actually absorbed the power of the violent earth bear. A young man smacked his lips and looked enviously at the giant-like figure not far away. Your family has struck it big this time. Yes, and from the looks of it, he clearly hasn't fully digested this power. His strength will definitely improve in the future. As mentioned before, the power system of warriors in the northern wilderness was different from that of the brand. The mainstream cultivation method here wasn't fighting aura or magic. Instead, it was controlling magical beasts to attack, or directly borrowing the power of magical beasts to strengthen oneself. After learning that this giant-like figure had absorbed the power of the violent earth bear, all the young men were clearly shocked and envious of the Tager family. As for Tang Yin, needless to say, they had subconsciously ignored him. Oh, there are still people who remember. Tager waved his hand reservedly and laughed. Haha, luck. It's my family's good luck. Why don't we watch the violent power displayed by Hamba after he absorbed the level 4 magical beast, the violent earth bear? He paused. Oh, while we're at it, let's pray for that brand as well. At most, he would have been beaten up, but now. He spread his hands regretfully. Naturally, the young men raised their heads and laughed heartily when they saw this. They looked at the intersection with great interest as the two approached. One was like a giant with a domineering aura. The other was like a dwarf with an insignificant figure. When they were about 10 meters apart, suddenly, boom, the ground trembled with a loud bang. Hamba's tall figure looked clumsy, but with a single step, his body leaned forward. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of the brand. He lowered his arms and opened them wide, hugging the man. This posture easily made everyone who was watching think of a mountain black bear. This seemingly simple hug actually contained more than 1,000 pounds of strength. It was truly invincible and irresistible. Tager laughed when he saw this. I didn't expect Hamba to be so impatient. He's clearly trying to. Before he could finish a sentence, snowflakes flew everywhere at the intersection, forming a curtain of snow. When the snowflakes fell, the charging giant and the short brand instantly switched places. Then, the giant body flew out rapidly. Bang! A horse carriage happened to be passing by. Fortunately, only the roof of the carriage was damaged. Wood splinters flew everywhere. The carriage was still running, but the roof of the carriage was gone. Its momentum didn't slow down, and its huge body continued to fly until it crossed the several feet wide road. Finally, under everyone's gaze, it slammed into the wall of the opposite shop. Boom! A huge human-shaped hole appeared in the wall, and the entire shop trembled. Accompanied by several high-pitched screams, panicked figures rushed out from inside. Then he stopped. In his line of sight, the entire street was filled with dumbfounded passers-by. Killed his brand bastard Ugg. Tager unconsciously finished his sentence. He stared blankly at the brand who was still standing in the same spot. He turned his head stiffly and looked at the huge hole in the wall several meters away. He swallowed with difficulty. Gulp, it's over. I've kicked an iron plate. Of course, Tager was not the only one with such thoughts. However, before the other young men could react, the brand named Arthur moved. He looked around and saw the motionless passers-by. He rubbed his forehead and looked somewhat distressed. Then, he stepped forward and came to the hole in the shop. He gently jumped into it. Who did we offend? The young man with a mouthful of black beard grabbed his hair and groaned in pain. No one answered him because the brand had come out again. At the entrance of the shop, Arthur grabbed Hamba's fur and dragged the giant body out as if he was dragging a dead black bear. Suddenly, the giant, whose broken bones were almost piercing out of his body, raised his arms again and firmly grabbed the skinny arms on his fur. His muscles bulged, and he roared hoarsely, like a dying beast making its final struggle. After pausing, Arthur lowered his head and quietly looked at Hamba. Fight back, fight back. Kill him, kill him. His lips trembled in fear, and his body trembled. But unfortunately, Togger's prayer did not have any effect. In his line of sight, Arthur calmly raised his left hand and pressed it on Hambl's forehead. Boom! Even though they were dozens of steps away, Togger could still feel the tavern shaking when he heard the loud noise. With this blow, Hamble's body disappeared from the ground. His tightly clenched hands loosened and fell limp beside him. Arthur rubbed his right wrist and raised his head to look at them. Damn it, he found us. What to do, run. Hurry up and run. Do you think you can run? Togger took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He shouted, don't panic. With our status, he won't dare to do anything to us. Besides, who knows if we did this? That makes sense. Tangham was in a bad mood. Of course, no one would be in a good mood after being provoked again and again. Tangham really didn't care about the dozen or so barbarians from before, because from a certain point of view, this could be considered a proper way to deal with them. However, with the appearance of the Northern Wilderness expert, the meaning was different. It was clear that the Northern Wilderness wanted to kill him. What a headache. How should he deal with this? Tang In rubbed his forehead and walked up the stairs of the tavern. Some people wanted to stop him, but after thinking about the shocking scene just now, they did not dare to move. Ta. Walking up to the second floor, Tang In did not hesitate and walked directly to the window seat. He glanced at the young men who were trying their best to pretend not to know him and shook his head slightly. What a joke. If an assassin could not find the culprit after being provoked twice in a row, he might as well quit his job. Walking to the table, Tang In stretched out his right hand. With a scream, the young man closest to Tang In jumped up like a rabbit that had been shot by an arrow. He cried out involuntarily, "You can't kill me. You don't dare to kill me." Tang In's arm froze. He was also a little scared by the young man's crazy actions. He grinned and poured himself a cup of wine. Togger and the other young men's eyes twitched. Looking at their comrade who confessed without being pressed, they wanted to strangle him to death. Damn it. Now he can't deny it even if he wanted to. Raising his cup, Tang In had a faint smile on his face. Let me introduce myself. I'm Arthur from the brand. May I know your... what's your name? Dozens of feet away, it was the same second floor. However, this was not a tavern, but a more luxurious entertainment venue. 10 seductive fox girls were wearing light muslin, and they were faintly discernible. They twisted their soft waists and danced gracefully while looking at people with seductive eyes. Unfortunately, this kind of seductive scene couldn't attract the two people sitting at the front. At this time, they were looking outside through the half-closed window. After a while, one of the young men narrowed his eyes and asked, "Is this the brand who made Lonshaw's glasses?" Arthur? That's right. The other middle-aged man looked a little familiar. If Tang In was here, he would have remembered that this person was one of the dozen or so vice chiefs of the Craftsman Institute. His expression was still a little shocked. He took a sip of wine and sighed. I really didn't expect him to be so strong. Those idiots who try to stick their heads out are probably out of luck. A bit interesting. The hook-nosed young man nodded. He looked at Tang In, who had come out of the tavern after a few minutes, and said, "Proficient in alchemy, strong, and knows his limits. Looks like this is the talent that His Highness Lon Shah wants to recruit. I should find an opportunity to make friends with him. This is indeed a rare talent. I heard that the Empress wants to reward him." But the vice chiefs frowned and looked at the hook-nosed young man before saying hesitantly, "I heard some rumors recently that His Highness Lon Shah treats this brand differently. He would go to the library every day to accompany him." What a ridiculous rumor. The hook-nosed young man sneered. With His Highness Lon Shah's intelligence, if he really wanted to do something with this brand, how could others find out so easily? Moreover, he paused as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he swallowed his words. He raised his chin and said arrogantly, "She can only belong to me. Lambit, the son of the berserk eagle, Lambit." If this young man really had such an identity, then it wasn't strange for him to say such words. After all, just this name alone gave him the right to be arrogant. And from a middle-aged man's reaction, this hook-nosed young man was undoubtedly Lambert. He raised his wine cup and said, "Then Uncle wishes you to pick this pearl of the northern wilderness as soon as possible." "Thank you, Uncle, for your auspicious words, huh?" Lambert laughed as he drank his wine. He narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, "Uncle, this isn't just a pearl of the northern wilderness, but a crown. Therefore, she can only belong to me, to the entire Berserk Eagle tribe." The chaos outside had been resolved. Not long after Arthur left, the young nobles walked out of the tavern with pale faces. They ordered people to clean up the scene and quickly left in a carriage. It was clear that this matter had come to an end. Arthur, who was quite strong, didn't dare to make a move against the young nobles. Of course, this was normal. As Lambert said, he knows his limits. However, was this really the truth? After about half an hour, Lambert finished his discussion with the vice director of the Craftsmen's Institute and was about to leave. A person who looked like a guard suddenly walked in and whispered something in the vice director's ear, following which his expression changed drastically. "What's wrong, Uncle?" Lambert asked in surprise. "This matter is..." Licking his dry lips, the vice director stared blankly for a moment before shaking his head. Just now, a large group of royal guards surrounded 4 or 5 family residences in the city. Then, the Empress gave an order, and these families were immediately uprooted. Uprooted? Yes, they're the families of those idiots we saw just now. Chapter 674. On this night, the Grand Desolation Imperial City was raging with wind and snow. A large number of Imperial guards swarmed out and ran quickly on the streets of the city, overflowing with killing intent. Thus, the curtains of turmoil began. Of course, this turmoil that was hidden under the twilight only continued to fluctuate in certain areas. In the eyes of ordinary people, they only felt that there seemed to be a little too many soldiers on the streets tonight. The occasional noise could only make them grumble in dissatisfaction in their sleep before turning over to continue sleeping. Compared to them, those with prominent positions could not remain calm. Listening to the news that came from various channels, whether true or false, and confirming that several large families have been annihilated in an instant, it was inevitable that they would be alarmed. More importantly, no one knew what the cause of this situation was. Where was the eruption point? Would it be related to their own families? Restlessness, uneasiness, panic. Finally, as the chaos became more and more intense, an inconspicuous piece of information gradually spread out and began to enter everyone's vision. The reason why those few families were mercilessly annihilated by the imperial family was because they had offended His Highness Lon Shah's friend, Arthur. The authenticity of this piece of information did not need to be verified. Just from the fact that it could appear in front of so many important people, it undoubtedly explained something. Of course, the more important reason was that when everyone saw this piece of information, their first reaction was not to question it, but to mutter to themselves in a daze, "Who is this Arthur? Where the hell did he come from?" The Grand Desolation Imperial City was very large, there was no doubt about that. But in the circle of influential people, it sometimes appeared extremely small. This was mainly reflected in the fact that if there was any interesting news, such as some woman having an affair, it would not take long for everyone to know about it. But now, even some influential people who had a wide range of connections could not help but scratch their heads in confusion when they saw this unfamiliar name. Was there such a person in the upper circle of the imperial city? But regardless of whether there was such a person or not, as long as the source was found, it would be easy to handle. Very quickly, the conflict that occurred on the streets in the evening was completely placed in front of the important people's cases. All kinds of information about the name Arthur were also dug out to the greatest extent. Brand's man did something at the craftsman's workshop, cured His Highness Lon Shah's eye disease. Once save His Highness Lon Shah's life. Realization dawned upon him. When they saw the contents of the investigation, especially the last two pieces of information. Everyone understood what had happened. Then, they sighed with emotion at the reckless behavior of those idiotic young men and scolded them for causing everyone to be worried and scared for half the night. After venting their frustrations, all the noble children were warned by their elders that they were not allowed to provoke a brand named Arthur. In just one night, Arthur was on fire. Of course, Ting In, who had gone back to rest, didn't know about this. Or rather, they wouldn't even dream of it. Previously, he had wanted to keep a low profile, so when he went up to the second floor of the tavern, he only politely asked for the names of the youths. When he learned their names, he would hand it over to the royal guards and have them inform Andre to deal with this matter. It was the most appropriate way to deal with it. On the one hand, he had agreed to Andre's previous instructions, and on the other hand, he had successfully removed himself from the situation. Perfect. Tang Un was even a little proud of himself for this, sighing with emotion that his EQ was getting higher and higher. But he didn't know that things would develop to such an extent. Not only were the families of the young men who caused trouble uprooted, but he also became a scourge in the circle of noble children late at night in the palace castle. Just as Tang Un, the initiator of all this, was still in his warm bed, listening to the wind blowing and snow blowing all night, indulging in a beautiful dream, Lan Sha, who was neatly dressed and wearing a pure white fluffy cloak, looked at the Empress's private library that was still lit in front of him. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and his hand, which was about to knock on the door, paused in midair. After receiving the news, those royal guards who immediately set off from the castle and surrounded the few families were sent by her. To be honest, Lan Sha didn't think too much at that time. That feeling was more or less similar to the anger of, "You dare to provoke the person under my protection." But the imperial order that was issued later, as well as the forceful action to wipe out the few families, were all the handiwork of his mother. Lan Sha didn't quite understand his mother's intentions. In fact, ever since he came back and received a series of shocking news, he hadn't spoken to his mother face-to-face for the past few days. Creak! Just as Lan Sha was in a daze, the wooden door in front of him opened, and Serene, who was holding a teapot, walked out. She looked up and saw Lan Sha, and couldn't help but be stunned. Then, she smiled warmly and said, "Oh, it's Prince Lan Sha. Are you here to look for the Empress?" "Aunt Celine, good evening." Lan Sha immediately adjusted his expression, and after a simple salute, nodded slightly with some hesitation. Then go in. It's cold outside. I'll go make a pot of tea." Celine smiled and left, not closing the wooden door behind her. Seeing this, Lan Sha's eyes flashed, and he bit his lip lightly as he walked in, closing the door on the way. The room was a little cold, and the unique smell of many books floated quietly in the air. "Sha, you're here." Very obviously, the simple conversation outside the door had been heard. The Empress sat behind the table, holding a brush and looking up. Her expression didn't have the usual majesty, only a faint smile on her lips. She called out his nickname gently and casually. "Mother." Hearing this, Lan Sha's eyes drooped slightly, and he took a few steps forward to bow solemnly, but was stopped by the Empress with a smile. There are no outsiders here, no need to bow. Come, sit by my side." The Empress's chair was very spacious. Not to mention the slender Lan Sha and the Empress, it was more than enough for two burly men to sit. Just as Lan Sha walked over, the Empress pulled his arm and sat down. She caressed him a few times, then laughed softly and said, I thought my daughter would ignore me for the rest of her life." Pause for a while. Without waiting for the somewhat embarrassed Lan Sha to bow his head and apologize, the Empress clapped her hands to indicate that it was fine, and continued, "You're here for that Arthur, right? How's the situation outside now?" "It's already been settled, and the situation will soon calm down. It's not for him." Lan Sha was very smart, and instantly realized that the Empress's question was mixed with other meanings. Biting his lip lightly, he asked, "Mother, why did you give that order?" "There's no reason." Spreading her hands as if it was natural, the Empress's expression suddenly changed, and she revealed her domineering aura. Someone actually dared to make a move on my precious daughter's savior. Isn't that courting death? Mother. His tone rose, a little reproachful and a little coquettish. Have I been seen through? In contrast to her usual dignified attitude, the Empress, who was now joking, even seemed a little mischievous. But perhaps this was her previous nature. Otherwise, she wouldn't have traveled thousands of miles just to run over to Bran to play. She smiled and shook her head. All right, other than this, there are indeed some other motives. Although the betrayal of the Battle Lion tribe has already been settled, it's hard to guarantee that there won't be some people who are still itching to make a move. Before these people's intentions are exposed, they can't be casually moved, and it's best not to put matters that can be dealt with under the table. Thus, it's very necessary to give them a warning normally, such as this time. Since you've already sent out troops, and you have sufficient reason to do so, and more importantly, you're angry, then someone needs to pay the price, and someone needs to be warned because of this. These words were very heartless, but this was the logic behind it. High and mighty people seemed to have no scruples in their words and actions, doing as they pleased. But in reality, it was because the people below were too narrow-minded and couldn't see or understand the rules and boundaries of those above. Of course, the people above them wouldn't let the people below them see their weak spots. Thus, once someone stepped on the line, they would definitely do what seemed cruel and ruthless, but in reality, it was an iron-blooded method to protect their own interests. From this point of view, the few families that were uprooted were undoubtedly wronged and became sacrificial lambs to make an example out of others. But the game of power had been like this since ancient times. Since they enjoyed the riches and honor in it, then they couldn't blame others for their destruction. Lansha was also a member of the royal family, and naturally wasn't unfamiliar with these methods. Hearing this, he nodded and didn't ask any more questions. But then he frowned slightly, as if he had thought of something, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Mother has been saying some things recently. I don't quite understand, and I don't like them. The Empress was surprised. And? Did you? A few days ago, Lambit and the others suddenly entered the city, and then they kept pestering me. Oh. The Empress pretended to be enlightened, and her expression was casual. This matter, I just casually mentioned it. I said that you've grown up, and it's time for you to consider some things. Well, that's it. I didn't say anything else, but they insisted on taking it that way. You can't blame Mother for this. Hearing this, Lansha's mouth twitched, and he resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the Empress. If Mother didn't say these words, how could there be such a big commotion? And under such circumstances, what was the difference between these seemingly obscure words and directly expressing one's intentions? In the end, he could only shake the Empress's arm and call out unhappily, "Mother, okay. Although these people misinterpreted my meaning, it's actually not bad." The Empress, who had obviously made up her mind to deny it, said with a calm expression, "You've indeed grown up, and these things should be considered. Why, you don't like Lambit? Weren't you close when you were young?" Lansha frowned. "Mother, you said it yourself. That was when we were young." "Oh, then what about Tiger from the Hidden Snake tribe? I also don't like. Wuhan. Wuhan from the Demonic Tiger tribe is quite good-looking. How about it?" "Also no, then." Lansha, who only cared about shaking his head, hurriedly waved his hand. "It's not that I don't like them. Oh, then you like them?" "Mother." She raised her voice again, strongly dissatisfied. "I haven't considered this aspect at all, so no matter who you're talking about, I won't feel anything." "Oh, including Arthur?" "No." "Huh? Chapter 675. The room was silent, and the chill seemed to have always existed in the room, showing no signs of dissipating. Lansha's delicate body suddenly tensed up like a cat with its hair standing on end. She looked at the Empress, who had a mysterious smile on her face, and was speechless. The next moment, she cried out in embarrassment, "Mother, you're trapping me." "No, many facts have proven that what is blurted out is often the truth." "So?" The Empress narrowed her eyes. "Do you like Arthur?" Rumble. It was like 1,000 claps of thunder exploding in her ears, and Lansha's mind went blank. However, she was only absent-minded for a short second before she opened her mouth and turned her head away. Whatever you say, you just want me to get married soon. Get married soon? Haha, I don't think so. The Empress smiled and patted the back of Lan Shah's hand. Celine should have told you that your current status is different from before. You're no longer a simple royal highness, but the heir to the northern wilderness's imperial power, the only heir. Lan Shah was silent, and her 5 fingers curled and clenched subconsciously. In fact, the reason why she had been avoiding her mother for the past few days was because she wanted to avoid having a showdown about this matter. Since young, Lan Shah was much stronger than Brother Tiu in every aspect except martial arts. And to inherit the northern wilderness's imperial throne, one's personal strength was the least important. But even so, Lan Shah had never thought of replacing Tiu. However, the situation was different now, and Tiu no longer had any hope of inheriting the throne. And she, as the only heir to the northern wilderness's imperial bloodline, had no other choice. To say something that sounded pretentious, the current situation was that even if Lan Shah didn't want to be the next northern wilderness empress, she would still be forced to take the position. As a member of the imperial family, especially a woman, this is an extremely fortunate, but also an extremely sad thing. Slightly shaking her head, the Empress looked indifferent. You definitely understand the meaning of this sentence, so I won't say more. Now let's talk about your marriage. Listen to me. Actually, you don't have to reject this because you'll have to face it sooner or later. She waved her hand to stop Lan Shah from speaking and continued. There are many dramas and novels in the brand. They say that the love of a noble woman will often be sacrificed for political interests. Well, that was a good way to put it, but it was too absolute. In fact, there was nothing pure in this world. Love was the same. How could it not be mixed with a trace of interest? Even if it was a commoner woman who chose her lover, she would still have to consider if the other party was wealthy and handsome enough. Or at the very least, she had to be worthy of him in some way. Just like commodities, if you want to get them, you have to pay a corresponding price. Does it sound realistic? Very cruel? Haha, in fact, it only sounds so. That's the truth. It just depends on whether we are willing to admit it or not. Shah, you are the princess of the imperial family and the only successor of the next empress. So the value of the benefits you represent will be even greater. So great that if there are no special circumstances, no one can influence your choice. So, you only need to stand here beautifully and watch all the suitors take out their so-called price to madly win your favor. Well, for example, this time, I only faintly let out some wind. Oh, they misinterpreted my meaning. The young talents of all the tribes rushed into the imperial city one after another and kept appearing around you. Spreading her hands, she said, "See, this is your charm, the charm of a woman of the imperial family. You can wait for a good price until you find a man you like, who also likes you and is willing to pay a certain price. Because of this, I don't want you to get married quickly, at least before you become the empress. Because even if you can't find such a man, the value of the benefits you represent will only continue to expand, and it won't be smashed in your own hands. For example, if you encounter the special circumstances I've just mentioned in the future, such as the shaking of the throne and being in imminent danger, at that time, you have no choice but to marry a man who can stabilize the situation. Don't doubt, no man will refuse this proposal. Then your value will be enough for you to keep the throne, or at least to keep your own life. Of course, this is also the sad part. But in the end, you can still choose the strongest price, so it's not too much of a loss." Without a doubt, this straightforward and naked view of love and benefits was still somewhat unacceptable to the current Lan Shah. This had nothing to do with wisdom, only with experience. He murmured, "Then, mother, you still found so many people to let me choose." "No, to be precise, I didn't find them, but they came voluntarily. I didn't give you a choice now, just let you see." The Empress smiled and said, "You are the only successor of the next empress. I have to let you understand your own value, so that you won't foolishly give yourself away." Pausing for a moment, the Empress shook her head lightly. "Let's talk about something else. In dramas and novels, There's often a romantic scene where a noble girl falls in love with a commoner's son and elopes with him in the end. This really does happen in reality, although it's rare. I also sent people to investigate these cases. Guess what the results were? She asked and answered her own question. Other than those who were quickly caught, most of the noble girls, after living with commoners for a period of time, choose to return to their families in the end, either because they couldn't bear the hardship, or because they had nothing to say, or because they couldn't bear the difference in their lover's attitude, and so on. Of course, there were also those who were too ashamed to return, but they were separated from the commoners, living alone until old age. Yes, I remember there were more than 20 cases at that time. Unfortunately, other than those who had only been together for a short time, none of them were successful. In the end, drama novels are just drama novels. You can read them, but don't take them seriously. This kind of fairy tale-like case was undoubtedly too cruel. Even someone as calm as Lan Shah couldn't completely recover for a while. However, his heart immediately moved, and he frowned at the Empress. "Mother, you're still talking about me and Arthur." The Empress looked away and said lightly, "I didn't say that. You're just too sensitive." "Well, then what's so good about Arthur that he's worth you thinking about so much?" There it is again, a low-level language trap. The truth is that you did send people to avenge him. TSK, almost 5 brigades of royal guards. How come I didn't know you had such a temper? That's because he's someone I've focused on recruiting, and he really does have such value. Is that so? The Empress looked at Lan Shah's glasses and reached out to take them off. "This isn't glasses? Let me try it on." Why can't I see anything?" Lan Shah smiled and took the glasses. Mother, you're not nearsighted. Of course you can't see anything. Also, if you keep wearing it, you'll get dizzy. Nearsighted? What's that? This is a term Arthur said. He probably made it up himself. I don't really understand it. However, this isn't important. Mother, did you know that this Arthur always has strange ideas? He's making a telescope now. It's a magical mirror that allows ordinary people to see far away. Bran doesn't have this thing yet. He created it himself. Mother, think about it. If we have this thing, then the combat power of the army. As if scratching an itch, Lan Shah's spirit was suddenly lifted. He spoke very quickly and kept gesturing, trying to explain how magical this thing was and how it had various benefits and so on. The Empress listened with a smile and nodded from time to time. She seemed to be very interested. However, Lan Shah didn't realize that as she unconsciously mentioned Arthur more and more, the Empress squinted more and more frequently. Such a lively chat lasted for a while, until Serene came in with a pot of hot tea. Lan Shah then realized that it was actually the middle of the night. He got up and said casually, "Strange, why is it so cold here? I didn't notice it before. Mother, let's put 2 stoves here to drive the cold away." The Empress's body trembled slightly, but she quickly covered it up. She waved her hand and smiled. "Maybe it's because it's been snowing recently. Forget it, there are too many important books here. It's not safe to put the stoves here." Lan Shah just mentioned it casually and didn't care. However, when he walked to the door, he suddenly remembered something. He turned around and said seriously, "Mother, I want to ask you a question. I hope you can answer me honestly." The Empress was stunned. She looked at Lan Shah's expression, nodded, and waved her hand to let Selene leave first. "Okay, what's the question? I want to ask." Lan Shah stared at the Empress's face. "Do you love my father?" "My father?" Lan Shah emphasized. The father that Lan Shah asked was undoubtedly the father in her memory, the father of the War Lions tribe who later died of illness. Lan Shah didn't care what had happened between her mother and Z. She only knew that she was her father's daughter. Therefore, she had to get an answer to this question, a satisfactory answer. The Empress leaned back slightly and looked at Lan Shah, who had an extremely serious expression. A strange expression appeared on her face, but it disappeared in a flash. She nodded. "I love your father. I love him very much." Phew! Lan Shah heard this and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled and bowed. "Thank you. Good night, Mother." "And good night." Chapter 676. The next morning, it was still snowing. "Morning, Mr. Ma." Tangan waved his hand and walked out from behind the iron gate. He then rubbed his hands and looked at Matthew, who was waiting for him. He was taken aback. "Oh, your injury is so serious? Why don't you ask for leave and rest for a few days?" Matthew, who had bandages wrapped around his hands and a white cloth wrapped around his head, looked a little miserable. He smiled bitterly. "Forget it, it's not a big deal. The glass's frame is about to be improved. How can I not go now?" "Sayu." Tang sighed and shook his head disapprovingly. In fact, Tang already knew about Matthew's injury last night. And speaking of it, this injury had something to do with him. It turned out that the reason why Matthew did not arrive at the agreed intersection in time yesterday was because the old horse pulling the carriage was hit by a brick out of thin air. The carriage then went out of control, and Matthew kept colliding in the carriage, which was why he ended up in such a miserable state. Because he did not see who threw the brick, Matthew could only admit that he was unlucky and did not think much about it. However, in Tangan's view, combined with the situation last night, Matthew's car accident naturally could not have been an accident. It was deliberately designed by the young man. However, although the injury was not light, seeing that the glass's frame was about to be modified, Matthew naturally would not let go of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and let the credit be taken by others. Therefore, he insisted on working with his injury today. In this regard, Tangan naturally could not say much. After all, everyone's life was different. In his view, the so-called glasses were just a gadget casually made. But in Matthew's view, this was a great opportunity to get closer to the royal family and have a meteoric rise. After boarding the carriage, Matthew, as usual, began to talk about the new information he had received. For example, which of his compatriots married a woman from the northern wilderness, or gloated about the embarrassing things of the northern wilderness people. Mocking the other party's vulgarity and drinking tea with spices, there were no newspapers in the northern wilderness. And this was a relaxing place similar to a pub, which did not welcome Matthew and the others. Therefore, other than working, these foreigners could only gather together to exchange information and talk about interesting things. It was a rare way to pass the time. Halfway through the journey, Matthew seemed to have thought of something. "Oh, by the way, I also received news this morning that a few big families in the north and south of the city were wiped out in one night. I don't know who provoked them. Haha, it's really delightful. But old John and the others who live around there were frightened and ran out overnight." Wait a moment." Tang's heart skipped a beat. "Those clans were their names." Matthew looked at Tang in surprise and frowned. "I can't remember clearly. Let me think. Oh, one of them seems to be called Luo Chaga or something, which translates to Poulet Preston." Tangan's expression was strange. He slapped his thigh. "Yes, that's the name. Arthur, how did you know?" "Hey." After sending away the confused Matthew, Tang walked to the palace castle. His face was a little gloomy, and he vaguely knew that the situation seemed to be out of his expectations. Last evening, because of the giant-like master who appeared later, Tang already knew that the attack was not simple. But to be honest, he really did not have the time to investigate carefully, so he kept a low profile and directly handed the matter to Andre and the others to deal with. In Tang's opinion, although Andre and Lansha were good to him, he was still an outsider. As for the youths in the tavern last night, he could tell at a glance that they were either wealthy or respectable. So what Andre and the others could do was to give them a warning and scare them. In the worst-case scenario, he would just beat them up and bring them over to apologize to him. That was about it. Of course, Tang was a little unhappy about this, but it was actually understandable. After all, this was how the upper echelons dealt with matters. It was a game of chess that would affect the entire situation. As for holding down the other party and chasing them to death, it was basically the style of street gangsters. But after listening to Matthew's gossip, Tang was completely speechless. Overnight, a number of royal guards were dispatched and directly violently flattened several large families. What kind of situation is this? Could it be that Lansha has really taken a fancy to this young master? There is no doubt that this idea was ridiculous, but it was also the most logical speculation that Tang In could think of at the moment. Apart from that, Tang In also had a bad premonition in his heart. He was uneasy about the role he had played in this large-scale operation. Could it be that he had become famous? F***, I really wanted to keep a low profile. While thinking, Tang In arrived at the main gate of the castle. The guards here were basically familiar with him. He looked around and asked, "Where is Captain Andre?" "Mr. Arthur." Tang In turned his head and saw Andre trotting all the way out from behind the gate. There was a layer of snow on his shoulders. Obviously, he had been waiting for him for a long time. Without bothering to be polite, he went straight to him. "I was just about to look for you. What happened last night?" "What happened?" "Ha! Mr. Arthur, don't worry. It's fine now." Looking up and laughing, Andre looked very excited. Those idiots didn't have eyes. They dared to provoke Mr. Arthur. After I received the order last night, I immediately led 5 brigades of royal guards to surround those families. In just half an hour, they were all taken down. Ha! After confirming the news and hearing such a big commotion, Tang In's face suddenly became a little bitter. "This? No one has any objections?" "They dare." This was an order personally issued by the Empress. "And now, who doesn't know that you are the savior of His Highness Lan Shah? Those idiots were courting death. Who dares to say anything?" Arthur, what's wrong with you?" Andre paused and quickly reached out to support Tang In, who suddenly staggered. Waving his hand and licking his dry lips, Tang In asked again with a fluke mentality, "Now, everyone knows that I saved Lan Shah?" "Of course. Damn it. What's the point of keeping a low profile?" Tang In looked up to the sky and sighed. It was as if 1,000 grass mud horses were running through his chest, alone in the chaotic wind and snow. "In? What?" He waved his hand weakly. "Oh, nothing. Let's go into the city first. Help me. The snow is a little slippery." Just as Andre was supporting Tang In to the library, a luxurious carriage behind them passed through the city gate and slowed down. Then the curtain was lifted, and a gaze fell on Tang In and his companion. "Hee, what are you looking at?" Inside the carriage, a feminine-looking youth with a devilish smile sat on a white tiger fur blanket and asked with a smile. Putting down the curtain, the person leaning against the window turned around. His eyes were sinister, and his nose was hooked. It was the son of the berserk eagle, Lambit. "Nothing. Have you heard of the name Arthur?" "Arthur?" The feminine-looking youth raised an eyebrow. "The one from last night? Why, do you know him?" "No, but now I really want to meet this brand." "Huh. That's easy, just an invitation." The feminine-looking youth had a swift and decisive personality. He twirled the ring on his pinky finger. "How about tonight? I'll go with him to see for myself." For Lan Shah to value someone so highly, there must be something special about him. Lambit nodded lightly and glanced at Tiger. "It's rare that you think the same as me, Tiger." "Ha! That's where you're wrong." The feminine-looking youth called Tiger laughed loudly with a devilish expression. "We have the same goal now, don't we? But I won't lose to you this time. Lan Shah belongs to me in the end. He also belongs to the hidden snake tribe." Then let's see who's more capable." Near dusk, library. 2 absent-minded rich kids with books in their hands bumped into each other on the path of densely packed bookshelves. "Are you King blind? Why are you here?" "Speaking of me, what about you? Shouldn't you be rolling around on a fox girl's belly at this time?" F***. Can't I cultivate and read occasionally? I'm just here for a stroll. Oh, nice to meet you." They laughed awkwardly and looked at each other. Then they shrugged. "Okay, I'm actually here to see that crazy brand. I just thought he looked familiar." I was forced by the old man. He made me remember his face clearly and said that I can't offend him no matter what. F***. Seeing each other with sincerity, they held each other's hands tightly. It was as if they were brothers in distress. "Let's not talk about it anymore. I'm King a tyrant in the Imperial City. I didn't think that I'd fall to the point where I have to look at other people's faces one day. Sai, just bear with it. We're much better than Tiger and the others. We just went up to provoke them, and when we returned, our families were uprooted. How tragic. I know, right? Ugh. Let's go, that crazy Bran is coming. F***CK. Tangen's sensitive hearing took in every word of this conversation. His mouth twitched a few times, and his already ugly face darkened even more. He had heard similar conversations many times today. Now, no matter where he went, he would be scrutinized by many eyes. The so-called national treasure panda was treated like this. Lan Shah, who came to disturb him regularly these days, didn't come today. However, Tang In wasn't happy about it. On the contrary, it made him even more depressed. He now hoped that Lan Shah would come over and let him have a good taste of his poisonous tongue. What the F***CK is this? Gloomily, Tang In stuffed the book back into the bookshelf. He looked up at the skylight. Forget it. Since he couldn't afford to offend him, he could still hide. He should leave early today. Of course, before leaving, he had to confirm one thing. He closed his eyes, stood quietly in place, and exclaimed in his heart, "Killer system." The scene changed instantly. When he opened his eyes, he was already in the familiar modern library style. "How is it, old butler?" he asked weakly. Tang In didn't have any hope. Needless to say, this was naturally asking if there was any information about poisons in the books collected today. Tang In had asked similar questions many times in the past few days. Of course, there was no exception. "Found it," the old butler said calmly with an indifferent expression. "Oh, then continue tomorrow." Subconsciously waving his hand, Tang In's figure disappeared from the space. However, in an instant, the invisible figure suddenly appeared again. With a look of disbelief, his mouth trembled. You, what did you just say?" The old butler glanced over and had no interest in answering again. With a wave of his hand, a hologram popped up. The screen was a yellow page. "Huh, found it. I finally found it, huh?" He looked up to the sky and laughed. He leaned back and waved his arms wildly. At this moment, Tang In seemed to be possessed by Fan Jin. He seemed to have gone crazy. It was no wonder that Tang In was so ecstatic. He had recorded nearly hundreds of thousands of books in the past few days. Now that he finally found it, he naturally couldn't stay calm. He quickly rushed to the bottom of the hologram and looked up at the extremely abstract characters that looked like scribbles. Needless to say, this was naturally the language of the northern wilderness. Fortunately, Tang In could understand it now. The general meaning was, "This poison has no name. It is a specially mixed poison of the Sirius royal family. The poison is extremely complex and almost impossible to completely identify. It is also precisely because of this complex poison that in order to achieve balance, the strong and fierce poison is forcibly suppressed, forming a slow-acting poison. In the initial state, purple spots appear on the limbs, then seep into the organs in the middle of the body. Finally, the purple color spreads to the entire body, festering and rotting." There was no need to elaborate on the origin of this paragraph. There was also no need to consider how the writer knew about this poison. Just by looking at the yellowed page, one could tell that this was a long-time secret. However, the more Tang In looked at the description of the poison, the more familiar it became. Mixed slow-acting poison? Purple all over? Festering and rotting, damn. Cursing angrily, Tang In's face instantly turned ashen. Wasn't this the poison that Z was suffering from? The so-called difference was that he was now in the initial state of the poison. Z, on the other hand, was in the late stage and was completely incurable. He continued reading. "The poison is really complex. Perhaps it can be suppressed, but there is absolutely no antidote. As far as I know, the only antidote is pure ancient black dragon blood. Although this is not an antidote, it can forcefully neutralize the poison and achieve the goal of detoxification. However, the ancient Black Dragon clan has long been extinct. Occasionally, there are traces of them, but they're only of a thin bloodline, so the effect is minimal. Throughout the continent, only a few hundred years ago, the Sirius royal family accidentally obtained some ancient Black Dragon blood. The following content was no longer important. Tang In retracted his gaze and took a deep breath. Little girl, you are really something. Vicious, vicious, sinister, vicious needless to say. It was clear just by looking at the description of the poison. As for sinister, Tang In recalled that when he was playing chess with the Empress, she touched the wolf-shaped jade pendant and said that the antidote was in it. She probably didn't know that he was poisoned at that time. Otherwise, she wouldn't have taken the initiative to say it. And in that jade pendant, there should be the so-called ancient black dragon blood. Regarding this point, Lan Sha definitely knew. She was also holding the other half of the jade pendant that she found on him. In other words, after Tang In ate the poison, he helplessly escorted Lan Sha all the way back to the imperial city. But he didn't know that the antidote was actually with him, and that it was taken from him. Cha! 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 Tang In grabbed his hair, his face a little twisted. Of course, he was angry. After all, no one would feel good after being deceived. However, he had to admit that most of it was because he felt ashamed of his own inferiority. What the hell was I thinking at that time? I usually thought that I had good eyesight, but why couldn't I see that this little girl was lying all the time? Is it because her cultivation is too high, or is it because my cultivation is not enough? Holding his head and squatting on the ground, Tang In struggled for a long time until the old butler reminded him that he had been standing for too long in reality. Then, he slowly got up and sighed dispiritedly. Zhang Wuji's mother was right. You can't trust a woman. The more beautiful a woman is, the more deceitful she is. While his sigh was still echoing in the space, Tang In reality had already opened his eyes. He glanced at the strange gazes around him, shook his head speechlessly, and walked towards the corridor. When he passed by the circular wooden table, Bamitu, who seemed to be dozing off 24 hours a day, raised his head and looked at Tang In with a strange smile. Little kid, did you fight with someone last night? Although he was in an extremely bad mood, Tang In naturally wouldn't neglect the enigmatic Bamitu. You know about this too? I thought you never left the library. Huh, so what if I don't leave the library? At my age, there are very few things that I don't know. Oh, is that so? Tang In raised his eyebrows. Then I have a question to ask. Bamitu waved his hand disapprovingly, appearing to be very confident. Go ahead and ask. But if I answer, you have to tell me, what kind of mental cultivation method do you practice? One question for one question. Fair enough. Okay. Without further ado, Tang In simply nodded. My question is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Haha. What kind of question is this? Of course, the chicken came first. That's not right. Where did the chicken come from without the egg? Then the egg came first. That's not right. Where did the egg come from without the chicken? Looking at Bamitu, who pulled his hair and instantly fell into an infinite loop of confusion, Tang In turned around and stepped into the corridor. The corners of his mouth rose, and he exhaled softly. His depressed mood actually eased a lot in an instant. Sure enough, things like negative energy can only be alleviated by selfless dissemination. Thinking so, Tang In walked through the long corridor and arrived at the hall. Just as he was about to step out of the door, a figure suddenly blocked his way. It was an old man in the northern wilderness, dressed in green, with a few strands of white beard on his chin. About 10 steps away, he flicked his sleeve, and a gilded invitation flew flatly in front of Tang In. Tonight at 7 o'clock, you must be punctual for the appointment. It was like an order, resolute and decisive. With that, he simply turned around and left. Wait, Tang In didn't open the invitation, but casually tossed it back. Sorry, I've been a little busy recently, so I can't make the appointment. Please pass on my apologies. This was the truth. Since he already knew the location of the antidote, Tang In naturally had to make a good plan for it. Turning around, the old man in green's face darkened slightly. He flicked his sleeve again and tossed the invitation back. I hope you can finish reading the invitation before answering me. After receiving the invitation, Tang In couldn't help but frown slightly. He opened it and glanced at it, then tossed it back. Oh, so it's Sir Lambit from the Wild Eagle tribe. I'm sorry, I can't accept the invitation. Wild Eagle tribe? Lambit? The son of Wild Eagle. As Tang In walked out of the library, a large group of rich and powerful people naturally followed him. Now that they heard Tang and mention the owner of the invitation, they couldn't help but be in an uproar. They were clearly very shocked. Bran, with a deep shout, the surrounding noise was instantly suppressed. The old man in green's face was ashen, and his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, as if they could burn people. My wild eagle tribe invited you, so you must go. You can't not go. Tang Yin's long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly laughed. Chapter 677. After sending away the old man in green, Tang Yin briefly explained what had happened to the guard at the door and asked him to pass the message to Andre. Then he returned home smoothly. As soon as he entered the door, Tang Yin immediately gathered all the servants in the stone building and gave them a few days off. He also told them that they were not allowed to return without his orders. After all, the Wild Eagle tribe had always been arrogant and overbearing. Tang Yin did not think that they would accept his regret and apology so easily. Tang Yin did not mind. In this city with complicated terrain, if he wanted to hide, the other party would not be able to find him easily. However, it was different for Aunt Jinli and the others. If the Wild Eagle tribe really came knocking on their door, they would definitely not mind finishing off the Bran people along the way. After all, it was fate that they were able to meet. Furthermore, they had taken care of him for so many days. Naturally, Tang Yin would not drag these innocent people down with him. He might as well send them all away. Everything was ready. Dusk fell. Tang Yin casually picked a room on the second floor. He did not light the lamp. He pulled a chair close to the window and sat down with his clothes on. He entered a state of sleep with a calm expression. This calmness was not fake. To be honest, Tang Yin had been in the other world for more than 2 years. Almost half of the time, he was on the run. Therefore, he was used to this situation. He ate and drank as he pleased. There was no pressure at all. Tap, tap, tap. His fingers lightly tapped on the chair's handle. The sound was extremely regular. It sounded a bit like an old-fashioned clock in a modern world. Tang Yin was not simply waiting for the other party to launch an attack. Instead, he was thinking about how to get the antidote and escape successfully. First, there was the problem of the antidote. According to what Tang Yin knew, there were only 2 sets of antidotes, which were the 2 wolf-shaped jade pendants. They were on Lan Sha and the Empress respectively. There was no need to think about the Empress. Not to mention stealing it. Even meeting her was a big problem. If that was the case, then he could only start with Lan Sha. TSK. She wasn't easy to deal with. However, this thing was so important. Given her cautious personality, she should have kept it with her at all times. How should I steal? Oh no, how should I take back the jade pendant that originally belonged to me? The second option was to escape. Of course, Tang Yin wouldn't be so ignorant as to think that everything would be fine once he got the antidote. This was the imperial city of the Northern Wilderness, the heart of the Northern Wilderness tribes. Even if he could get out of the city, it would be impossible for him to get out of the Northern Wilderness in such a short time. Well, I need to narrow down my target a little. As long as he could avoid the initial strict search, he should have a high chance of escaping with his concealment skills. Therefore, his current goal was to disrupt the search team that the other party had organized immediately, especially the pursuers from the Imperial City. TSK. Looks like I have to go all out. The night grew darker. In the pitch-black room, Tang Yin quietly thought about the next steps. He kept coming up with and overturning several preconceived plans. Soon, he rubbed the center of his eyebrows, looking like he was having a hard time. It had to be said that this kind of large-scale tactical concept was really not Tang Yin's strength. If it was Lan Sha, he would definitely be familiar with the layout and not leave any flaws. Around 10 o'clock at night, Tang Yin, who was silent and motionless like a statue, suddenly opened his eyes. He leaned forward and reached out to gently open the curtain. Outside the window was the main entrance of the stone building. In the slowly falling snowflakes, large groups of soldiers in black armor could be seen gathering in front of the iron gate. Then, they were divided into small groups and spread out, surrounding the stone building so tightly that not even a drop of water could leak out. Tang Un's expression didn't change when he saw this, because these soldiers all turned around and stood in the predetermined position with their weapons facing outwards. It didn't look like an encirclement, but more like protection. He retracted his gaze and looked in front of the iron gate. There were a few figures discussing something. They seemed to be commanders. Then, a familiar figure waved his hand and pointed at the stone building, asking the person next to him. Narrowing his eyes, Tang In raised his eyebrows. He had already recognized these two people as Andre and the guard captain who was in charge of guarding this place. Seeing this, it was needless to say that Andre and the soldiers who were gathering here were here to protect him. The corner of his mouth rose. Looks like I'll be able to sleep well tonight. Muttering in a low voice, Tang In lowered the curtain and reclined back on the wooden chair. The arrival of Andre and the others undoubtedly made their position clear. In this way, even if the fierce eagle tribe had the absolute advantage, they wouldn't dare to attack the stone building. After all, if they really did that, then it wouldn't be a personal problem between the fierce eagle tribe and Tang In, but a direct declaration of war between the fierce eagle tribe and the serious royal family. The night passed without a word. The next morning, Tang In stretched his body and stopped looking at the situation outside the window. He got up and opened the door, waving his hand. "Good morning, Andre." At the end of the corridor outside the house, Andre was walking up the stairs to the second floor with a tired face. Hearing the voice, he couldn't help but be startled. He turned his head and waved with a bitter smile. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur." "Go my ass. How could he be good after standing guard in the snow for an entire night?" Tang In naturally didn't know that Andre was strongly complaining in his heart. He still laughed heartlessly. "Huh, have you eaten? Although Aunt Zheng Li and the others have left, there is still some food left in the kitchen. Hey, I'm a very generous person. I can share some with you." "Thank you. That's not what I wanted to say." Rubbing his forehead, Andre had a helpless expression. "Mr. Arthur, let's talk about it. The day before yesterday, when you fought on the street, I led my troops to flatten a few families overnight. Yesterday evening, when you chopped off 5 fingers of the fierce eagle tribe's expert, I led my troops to stand guard for an entire night. Sai, it can't go on like this. Sorry, I can't do anything about it." Tang In spread his hands innocently. "You know the specifics. They were the ones who came looking for trouble. I was just defending myself. But why am I always the unlucky one? I'm a little regretful now. When I entered the city, I asked you to look for me directly if you have any problems. Haha, this is called the capable ones do more work. Besides, didn't I treat you to breakfast? In cheese or bread? Meat slices, a big piece of meat. Thank you." Andre's complaint was, of course, just a joke. As he said earlier, he naturally knew that Tang In wasn't at fault for these 2 incidents. But he didn't know if it was because he was really afraid or because he received orders from someone. After Matthew arrived, he was invited by Andre and Tang In to a luxurious carriage. A large group of royal guards opened the way for them and drove to the craftsman's office with great momentum. Tang In couldn't refuse again. This was because he really had a lot of things to do in the past 2 days, and the consequences were really a little serious. Naturally, he couldn't say much. Secondly, he had a purely indifferent attitude. Previously, Tang In didn't agree to ride in Tiu's carriage because he wanted to keep a low profile. But now his name had probably already spread in the upper circle of Grand Desolate City. So it was better to be high profile, lest some stray cats and dogs dared to cause trouble. Inside the carriage, Tang In looked at Matthew, who was sitting upright with his upper body tense. The legs of his lower body were trembling nervously, and he looked very excited. He couldn't help but touch his nose. "Elder Ma, relax." "Relax?" I'm very, very relaxed." Matthew's face was stiff, and he had an authentic fake smile on his face. He thought to himself, riding in the luxurious carriage of the imperial family, accompanied by the personal bodyguards of the imperial family. How the hell am I supposed to relax like this? Tang In smacked his lips and immediately changed the topic. "Elder Ma, I want to get some minerals from the craftsman's office. Do I need to go through any procedures? You could just apply directly at the material warehouse." You can basically take it on the spot. Well, of course, sometimes you need to see if the material is in short supply. After a pause, Eldama asked, "What kind of, or do you need?" "Just simple saltpeter, sulfur, oh, and some charcoal." "Is there a problem with these things?" "They're all common things. Of course there's no problem. I remember there's a lot of them in the warehouse." Matthew agreed and then asked curiously, "But, Arthur, what do you want these things for? Do you need these to develop a telescope?" He shook his head. "No, it has nothing to do with the telescope. It's just an occasional inspiration that I want to do a simple little experiment." Tang and said casually, "Oh." Chapter 678. Early in the morning, the imperial city of the great wilderness was as peaceful as yesterday. Snowflakes drifted slowly, the doors of the shops were open, and the streets were bustling with people. From time to time, one could see a fierce child wrestling with his bare chest on the snow by the side of the road. Occasionally, one could also see a few brand figures wearing wide hats, their postures cautious as they hurried past. It was a very normal day, at least that was what the citizens of the imperial city thought. If one had to point out something different, it would be that it was very rare to see the aristocratic children who were usually dressed in bright clothes and riding horses, swaggering through the streets. Of course, this was a good thing. No one wanted them to come out and act tyrannically. However, what the citizens did not know was that those aristocratic children who were usually arrogant and despotic were now confined to their homes and forbidden from going out. And the entire aristocratic class that they usually looked up to was now like a pool of stagnant water, solemn and austere, trembling with fear. Just as mentioned before, the aristocratic circle in the imperial city was very small. Unless they deliberately covered it up, there were almost no secrets between them. Last night's scene in the library, there were many aristocratic children present. After the birds and beasts dispersed, the news naturally spread quickly. Was it that Bran again? This was the first reaction of many important people when they saw the news, stunned and astonished. Then, the entire circle gradually became lively. Of course, the content of the discussion was mostly guessing how this Bran would die. Originally, although the families from before were not weak, their strength and background were not considered strong. And this Bran had, after all, saved His Highness Lanshaw's life, and the imperial family was indebted to him. It was reasonable for the imperial family to help him. In the end, this was the result. Although it was a little exaggerated, it was not unexpected. But it was different this time. The fierce eagle tribe was not something that those families with no foundation could compare to, and they had always been overbearing. No one would think that the Imperials would risk becoming enemies with the ferocious Hawk tribe just to stand up for a Bran who didn't know what was good for him. This had nothing to do with gratitude, but with benefits. What happened next seemed to prove this point. The son of the Mad Eagle, Lambit, who was waiting in a high-end place, was instantly enraged when he saw his dying subordinate being carried in, especially the 5 severed fingers wrapped in it. He did not care about Tiger, the successor of the hidden snake tribe, who was still present at the scene. He destroyed half of the high-end place and left in a huff. Naturally, it didn't matter if the high-end place was smashed because that was the property of the Wild Eagle tribe. However, behind such a huge loss of image, it was actually a clear message to the outside world, especially to the royal family. I'm very angry this time, so that Bran must die. Don't interfere. This was a warning in advance, and also to give the royal family a way out. The situation had developed to this point. Although Lambit could not represent the entire ferocious eagle tribe, with his identity as the successor in a Bran, the royal family would not go so far as to not give him face. However, the situation took a sudden turn, causing the high-ranking officials who were watching the show to be dumbfounded. They could not recover from their shock for a long time. It turned out that before Lambit ordered his men to kill the Bran, the imperial family had actually sent someone to negotiate, intending to protect that Bran's life. The negotiation between the two sides was not known to outsiders, but the large group of royal guards who went to the Bran's residence immediately showed the imperial family's determination. Of course, from this point, It could be seen that the first negotiation between the two sides was not going well. At this point, the high-ranking officials in the imperial city were speechless. They did not understand why the imperial family wanted to protect this brand, and at the same time, they did not know how the fierce eagle tribe would react. Therefore, they could only try their best to restrain themselves to avoid being caught in the crossfire at this special time. However, no matter how the outside world was brewing, Ting In, who was in the craftsman's office, would not be distracted by it. To be honest, he did not have the time to think about it now. Boom. There was a not too loud explosion. Sparks flew everywhere, and thick smoke billowed. Matthew, who was holding a few clay pots, had just arrived at the entrance of a laboratory when he was blown away by the shockwave. He was directly smashed against the wall of the corridor outside the door. Starlight flashed in front of his eyes, and the clay pots in his hands fell to the ground and shattered. Cough, cough. Cough, cough. Suddenly, a black figure that was still smoking quickly jumped out of the thick smoke. He leaned against the wall and bent over, coughing nonstop. Tears and snot flew everywhere, and he was in a very sorry state. Matthew was shocked and hurriedly took a few steps back. He looked up and down and asked with uncertainty, You're Arthur? If not, he rolled his eyes speechlessly. Well, Tang On's eyes and teeth were white, and the rest of his body was pitch black like a crow. Hey, how did you become like this? He waved his hand. Cough, cough, it's nothing. It's just a small mistake. A small mistake. Matthew turned his head and looked at the smoky laboratory. The corner of his eyes twitched, and he was speechless. Bomb. After spitting out the unknown residue in his mouth, Tang and looked at the laboratory that was destroyed in an instant. He grimaced as if he had a toothache. He muttered in his heart, 1 sulfur, 2 nitrate, 3 charcoal. I remember that's what my teacher taught me before. Why did it explode when it came to me? Yes, Tang was indeed making black gunpowder. This was also the best weapon he could think of to get rid of the large-scale pursuers. In fact, the alchemy level in this other world was already quite good. The explosive crystal was much more stable and powerful than this crude black gunpowder. This was also the reason why Tang did not think of making black gunpowder before. However, the situation now forced him to do so. As a foreigner, it was impossible for him to get the explosive crystal in a short time. He could only think of a way to do it himself. Of course, gunpowder was not something that could be casually touched since ancient times, let alone something that was developed with a primitive method like this. Fortunately, Tang was not an ordinary person. Otherwise, the explosion just now would have probably killed him several times. After patting the black dust off his body, Tang calmly asked, Elder Matthew, is there a bigger room in the craftsman's office? It doesn't have to be a laboratory, as long as it's big enough. You want to try again? Of course. Matthew shook his head speechlessly and said helplessly, Okay, I know a suitable place. It used to be a warehouse for storing materials, but it was abandoned later. I'll go get the key for you. Matthew was now the person in charge of the area. Of course, he still had this bit of authority. From this point of view, it was undoubtedly the right decision for Tang and to push him up the ranks. Didn't the reward come immediately? The location of the abandoned warehouse was in a remote corner. When he passed by the craftsman's office, Tang turned his head and looked outside. His line of sight was filled with the figures of the royal family. They were constantly patrolling back and forth, completely surrounding the craftsman's office. It was clear that even with Lan Shah's intervention, Lambert still had no intention of stopping. TSK, it's only 5 fingers. Do you have to be so agitated? Tang uncurled his lips and teased without any pressure. Since he knew about the antidote, Tang knew that he could not stay in the imperial city for long. To prevent any unexpected events from happening, it was best to leave as soon as possible. Therefore, as long as he did not provoke someone at the level of Bamatu, Tang did not care at all. What, the Wild Eagle tribe? The Wild Eagle tribe was indeed powerful, but this was the imperial city of the northern wilderness, which was the territory of the Sirius royal family. Therefore, the people that Lambert could mobilize were only those who entered the city with him. As for the powerful wild eagle tribe, they were still thousands of miles away and could not pose any threat to him. On the other hand, if the experts around Lambert were at the level of the old man in green, and Tang was determined to assassinate him, then it would be hard to say who would die first. After going through all the possible threats in his mind, Tang felt more at ease. He immediately cast these thoughts aside and followed Matthew to the abandoned warehouse. When he opened the rusty iron door, other than a few inches of dust, it was empty inside. Fortunately, the area was large enough to meet the requirements of making black gunpowder. Tang was overjoyed when he saw this. He called the numerous apprentices to bring over saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, and the black clay jar as containers. Then, he hesitated for a moment, but still drove everyone away and closed the door to study alone. Honestly speaking, Tang was a little touched by Lan Shah's attitude towards these two matters. After calming down, he thought about the issue of the antidote. That was a battle of wits and courage, and he could not blame others for his weakness. Right now, although both sides were taking what they needed, compared to a telescope and the possibility of becoming enemies with the Berserk Eagle tribe, it was obvious which was more important. But even so, Tang Yin still did not dare to leave the formula for black gunpowder in the northern wilderness. This thing was different from the telescope. Although it was crude, it was to some extent a killing weapon that could truly change the current situation of the battle. After all, there were many intelligent people in this world, and there was also a complete alchemy system. If they had this crude formula for black gunpowder, it would be hard to say what could be derived from it. It was also because of this that Tang Yin chased away Matthew and the other apprentices who wanted to stay behind to help. Doing research alone was undoubtedly much slower. Fortunately, after being bombed, Tang had gained some insights, and the research went much smoother. Finally, 10 minutes later, with a muffled sound in the empty warehouse, the first pop bomb was tested successfully. The power was not great, and if it was not within 3 feet of the surroundings, there would be no casualties. This result was normal. The reason why the bombs in the modern world were so powerful was not only because of the raw materials, but also because of the built-in steel balls and iron pieces. Once it exploded, these steel balls and iron pieces would shoot out in all directions, reaching a true range of damage. Time was tight, and it was his first time making black gunpowder, so Tang Yin did not add any ingredients after some consideration. However, although he did not use the concept of the modern world, Tang Yin used a little toy from the other world, a kind of plant berry the size of a soybean, which would produce a slight explosion when gently kneaded. Well, it was very light. Even if he bit it in his mouth, it would at most loosen his teeth. It was a mischievous thing, but it was this inconspicuous little thing that made Tang Yin ecstatic after seeing it. Vaguely, Tang looked into the distance. Through the warehouse door, he seemed to see the brilliant scene of explosions in the imperial city and flames soaring into the sky. He was really looking forward to it. An entire day, the royal guards were patrolling relentlessly. Lan Shah and Lambert were negotiating, and the upper circle of nobles was carefully inquiring about all kinds of news. In the corner of the craftsman's building, Tang was silently filling black pots one after another, his eyes indifferent and persistent. The next day, the abandoned warehouse was closed again. No one knew that the black pots that had piled up like a mountain yesterday had all disappeared overnight. Matthew vaguely knew a little and was very curious, but seeing the yawning Tang go back into the laboratory, he hesitated a few times, but in the end, he did not ask. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Matthew suddenly felt that his compatriot from the brand was a little different today. He could not pinpoint it, but he had a faint feeling that he seemed to be more relaxed and carefree than before. Of course, these speculations did not last long. He just turned his head and threw them to the back of his mind. At noon, seeing that Tang had not come out, Matthew brought some food to the laboratory. Before he knocked on the door, a voice came from inside. "Elder Ma, right? I was just about to look for you." "Haha, come in, the door is not locked." Matthew was stunned. "I haven't even gone in. How does he know it's me?" He shook his head and pushed the wooden door open. This was a new laboratory. It was also simple inside, but the crystal or residue piled up in the corner was more eye-catching. Tang Yin sat behind the experiment table with a brown wooden box in front of him. He was looking at him with a smile. "Arthur, this is lunch. I saw that you didn't come out for a long time, so I brought it for you." "Huh. Thank you, Elder Ma." After taking the lunch and putting it aside, Tang Yin did not intend to eat immediately. Instead, he waved his hand and said, "Come sit, Elder Ma, let's talk." Okay." Matthew sat on the chair with a puzzled look. Tang Yin did not explain and said seriously, "Elder Ma, although we haven't known each other for a long time, I've been taken care of by you these days. Thank you very much." Matthew hurriedly waved his hand when he heard the words. "What are you talking about? It's obvious that I have been taken care of by you. If it weren't for you, Arthur, I'm afraid now." He paused and seemed to realize something. "You mean, are you going to leave? Is the royal family not protecting you? Then hurry up and run. Yes, run now. What do you need me to do?" "Huh." Tang Yin laughed and waved his hand to interrupt Matthew, who suddenly panicked. He shook his head. "Elder Ma, what are you thinking? It's not like that. Well, I just want to thank you for taking care of me these days and want to give you a small gift." He let out a long sigh. "Phew. It's good that it's not. It's good that it's not. Oh, what a small gift." Tang Yin nodded, and then without waiting for Matthew to refuse, he pushed the brown wooden box in front of him. "It's this. It's not something valuable. Elder Ma, please don't reject it." After a pause, he continued, "Don't open it now. TSK, keep it a little mysterious." "Ha!" Matthew also laughed and shook his head. "Well, since Arthur said so, then I won't be polite. But when can I open it?" "When?" Tang Yin smiled and turned to point out the back window of the laboratory. "When there are many brilliant fireworks in the sky above the royal city, then you can open it. Well, it won't be too late." Matthew looked at the snowflakes outside the window and couldn't help but be stunned. He couldn't understand the meaning of this sentence at all. But before he could ask, Tang Yin suddenly looked up at the wooden door of the laboratory and raised his eyebrows slightly. Dong, dong, dong. He knocked on the door 3 times, neither lightly nor heavily. Before the person inside could respond, the wooden door was pushed open. The tailored fox fur robe was carved with natural curves, causing endless reverie. Exquisite facial features, a pair of plain-rimmed glasses on the smooth and handsome bridge of the nose. Not only did it not affect the overall temperament, but it also added a bit of intellectual and heroic spirit. It was Lan Sha, known as the Pearl of the Northern Wilderness. Tang Yin was not surprised. It was not a great skill to know who it was from the footsteps. Ordinary people could sometimes do it, so he naturally had no problem. He patted Matthew on the shoulder and handed the brown wooden box to him, then looked up and smiled. "Oh, isn't this our beautiful Royal Highness Lan Sha? How come you have time to come to my shabby laboratory today?" Although wearing glasses, Lan Sha still habitually narrowed her eyes and did not respond to Tang Yin's somewhat frivolous words. Instead, she looked at Matthew. Seeing this, the latter did not dare to stay here any longer. After bowing, he carefully closed the wooden door of the laboratory and hurriedly left. "Have you eaten? If not, I don't mind sharing half of it with you," said Tang Yin casually. Instead of bowing, she took the lunch on the side and prepared to eat. Lan Sha seemed to be used to this guy's unconventional behavior. She went forward and sat in Matthew's chair, frowning. "Can you not cause so much trouble? That's heartless of you to say. You know the specific situation. It's not my fault. Well, the meat today tastes pretty good. Are you sure you don't want some?" Tang Yin did not even raise his head. He quickly put the meat into his mouth with a fork and chewed continuously. Seeing this, Lan Sha's breathing showed signs of roughness, but then she let out a light breath, as if she was too lazy to continue arguing with Tang Yin. She said, "The matter has been resolved. The Wild Eagle tribe will not trouble you again. Lambit will come later. Apologize to him in person, and this matter will be over." Hearing this, Tang Yin raised his head and licked his lips. He did not say childish words like, "It's not my fault. Why should I apologize?" One must know that right and wrong were often not judged by axioms, but by strength. She smacked her lips. TSK, what price did you pay? You don't need to know that. And let's put it this way. Do you hate that Lambit? Lan Sha frowned. Ha, you know. Tang In waved his knife and fork and spread his hands. My strength is not bad. And frankly speaking, I used to be a killer, which is the so-called assassin. So, well, since we're acquaintances, I can give you a 10% discount and help you get rid of that annoying guy. Don't worry, no one will know. How about it? Chapter 679. Don't worry, no one will know. How about it? Tang had a smile on his face. His expression was calm, and his tone sounded both serious and joking at the same time. Or perhaps it was a combination of both. It had to be said that men were selfish creatures with strong hormones, and Tang was no exception. Although neither of them mentioned the scene in the underground river, it didn't mean that they had forgotten about it. Tang Yin felt that he did not like her, but the romantic and lingering images that often flashed in his dreams at night made him regard her as his own, whether intentionally or not. Of course, this feeling was very subtle. Even Tang Yin himself didn't realize it. It was only after knowing about the existence of Lambit and the other's intention to enter the city that he felt a little uncomfortable. Well, he had a desire to kill. Lan Sha was slightly stunned. He rolled his eyes and said angrily, Kill Lambit. Arthur, what are you thinking? If you continue like this, no one will be able to protect you. Don't get so worked up. It's just a business deal. If you don't want to, then forget it. Tang In shook his head and continued to eat his meat. Lan Sha frowned. He was obviously dissatisfied with this attitude, but he seemed to have other plans, so he didn't say anything. After a short silence, he suddenly said, You didn't go to the library for the past 2 days. Did you find the antidote? He stared at every expression on Tang In's face. With his mouth wide open, Tang In looked up and said with a faint smile, If I said I found it, would you believe me? Trying to analyze anything from Tang In's face, who was proficient in disguise, was undoubtedly impossible. After a moment of silence, Lan Sha was the first to shift her doubtful gaze away and said, This time, I have brought 2 elders from a clan. From now on, they will be by your side and be responsible for your safety. Also, if you encounter any situation in the future, let them deal with it. Tang In pursed his lips when he heard that and sighed. F***CK. This little girl is really smart. Tang In knew very well that the 2 royal guests were not there to protect him and prevent him from causing trouble again. Instead, they were there to monitor him. His sudden absence from the library pavilion for the past 2 days had undoubtedly aroused Lan Sha's suspicions. Although she probably didn't believe that she would be able to find the information about the antidote in the vast collection of books in the library, it was better to be safe than sorry. As a cautious person, she still decided to add another shackle to herself. It had to be said, to have such an opponent, how much sin did she commit in her previous life? Speechlessly shaking his head, Tang In did not reject Lan Sha's suggestion. Of course, there was no point in refusing. However, he had already made all the necessary preparations, but he was still one step too late. Of course, Lan Sha didn't know what Tang In was thinking. Seeing that he didn't refuse, he nodded with satisfaction and continued. By the way, there is a banquet tonight. You must attend it. Tang In raised his eyebrows in surprise. Banquet? Yes, it's hosted by Tiger of the Hidden Snake Tribe. Lambit and the others will be there. I will send someone to pick you up at that time. You will come with me. Tang In understood and nodded thoughtfully. Obviously, Lan Sha's actions were a follow-up to the previous negotiation. He wanted to show the outside world that this was just a misunderstanding and that there was no conflict between the royal family and the Wild Eagle tribe. Of course, he also wanted to show everyone that the serious royal family would definitely protect Tang In, a member of the brand, and eliminate any potential conflicts in the future. After thinking for a while, Tang In asked, When does the banquet start? Around 8 in the evening. I will pick you up at 7. Pause for a while. Lan Sha sized up Tang In. I will also bring you a set of clothes. Ah, thank you. That's it then. I will attend the banquet. Having said what he needed to say, Lan Sha got up and left. Don't forget, when Lambert comes later, you have to apologize to him. Your attitude doesn't matter, but the formality must be there. Tang Yin chuckled and didn't comment. Then, he narrowed his eyes. Are you leaving already? Of course. Just as you said, Lan Sha spread his hands. I do hate Lambert, so it's better not to see him. Tang Yin's expression turned strange. He stared at the wooden door. But he's already here. Huh? Even someone as calm as Lan Sha couldn't help but be shocked when he was caught talking behind someone's back. He suddenly turned his head. The wooden door was shut tight and empty. There was no one there at all. Lan Sha clenched his teeth. Anger gathered in his eyes. Narrowing his eyes, Lan Sha said coldly, "You..." Just as she turned her head and was about to reprimand him, she realized that Tang Yin, who had been eating behind the experiment table, had silently appeared in front of her. She was stunned. Without waiting for her to come back to her senses, Tang Yin slowly stretched out his hands. One hand held her smooth chin, the other pressed her hair behind her head. He lowered his head and accurately bit her thin red lips. Whoa! Lan Sha was shocked and stunned. It was obvious that she hadn't come back to her senses. She was dazed for a moment, and Tang Yin's sneak attack succeeded. In her shock, she subconsciously shook her head and struggled. However, not only did she fail to break free from the evil pair of hands, but she also lost control of her teeth in shock, and her tongue was captured again. A familiar numbing sensation came from her lips and the tip of her tongue. In an instant, her mind and body were numb. Her struggling body couldn't help but stop. It was as if thousands of thunderbolts exploded in her ears. Lan Sha's mind went blank. In her daze, the first thought that came to her mind was that the meat smelled terrible. The room was silent. Snowflakes fell quietly outside the window. It was a romantic and sad beauty. It felt like only a few seconds had passed, but it also felt like a few years had passed. It was like walking in a dream. Just as Lan Sha's arm unconsciously touched Tang Yin's back, suddenly. "It's right in front, please." Clear footsteps and words came from the corridor outside the room. In an instant, the ambiguous and quiet atmosphere was swept away. Lan Sha's misty eyes turned cold, and two muffled groans were heard. Their figures came together and separated, and they each took a step back. She touched her lower lip and licked it. The faint taste of blood immediately filled her mouth. However, Tang Yin didn't care at all. He looked at Lan Sha, whose lower lip was also broken and whose face was full of anger, and grinned happily. "Haha, if I knew that you would do this, I would also leave a mark on you today." Before he finished speaking, a fragrant wind suddenly swept past him. Slap! The clear and crisp sound of a slap echoed in the room. Tang Yin's expression didn't change. The red mark on his face was still hanging, and he smiled faintly. Lan Sha was obviously stunned. Her hand trembled, and her lips moved as if she wanted to ask, "Why didn't you dodge?" But in the end, she didn't ask. She paused, turned around, opened the door, and rushed out. He spat out a mouthful of foul air and touched the red marks on his face. "Who? This little girl is really ruthless." Twain shook his head and couldn't help but laugh. And then, with a flip of his right hand, a half-wolf jade pendant suddenly appeared out of thin air in his palm. He rubbed it for a while, and it seemed to carry a warm feeling. He whistled, pretending to be happy. He finally got it, Lan Sha. In the corridor outside the door, Lambert was led by a deputy director to the laboratory. Obviously, he was here to accept an apology. Unexpectedly, before he saw Tang Yin, he saw Lan Sha first. "Lan Sha, what happened to you? There's blood on your lips." Lan Sha acted as if he didn't hear the question. He lowered his head and quickly ran past the two people. What's going on?" Lambert, who was ignored, was a little stunned. He turned around and looked at Lan Sha's back, feeling a little wronged. Before he could fully understand what was going on, he felt a tug on his shoulder. He turned around and saw the deputy director staring blankly in front of him with a frightened expression. Subconsciously looking up, Tang Yin walked out of the laboratory happily, whistling with a clear palm print on his face. Seeing Lambert, The two people stopped in their tracks and waved to greet him. Hey, what a coincidence. Silence. Lambert stood there in a daze. His gaze lingered on the palm print for a while, before moving down to stare at the damaged lip. A drop of blood was gradually expanding. Licking his lips, Tang wiped the drop of blood away in an instant. He scratched his head. About that. I hit myself against the wall. Don't misunderstand. Lambert explained with a pale face. After saying that, he turned around and walked to the other end of the corridor. After taking a few steps, he suddenly stopped. Tang and patted his head as if he suddenly realized something. He turned around and spread out his hands. I almost forgot. Sorry, I injured your subordinate too badly the day before yesterday. I'm very sorry about that. Yup, that's it. Done. With both hands in his pockets, he whistled again. Lambert, who was in a daze and was about to go crazy, watched as he leisurely disappeared around the corner of the corridor. After a long while, the corridor suddenly erupted with thunderous roars. Bastard. I'm going to kill you. Chapter 680. Large groups of royal guards gathered at the entrance of the workshop. Since the matter here had been resolved, the guards of the palace had to be withdrawn. At this time, Lan Sha walked out of the iron gate in a hurry and walked towards the luxurious carriage. Andre walked up and said, Your Highness, Sir Lambert just went in. I think Mr. Arthur's matter has been resolved. She waved her hand impatiently and said, I don't care if he dies. She threw out these words cleanly, then entered the carriage with deep resentment. Andre was stunned when he heard this. He stood there with his mouth agape, but he didn't say anything for a while. Inside the carriage. Phew! Die! Lan Sha covered her red cheeks as she thought about how she was forcefully kissed. She kept kicking the animal skin carpet as if she was trampling on some despicable guy. Not long after, the luxurious carpet was destroyed. The fur was scattered everywhere and became a wrinkled rag in the corner. Panting, Lan Sha's body moved up and down. After venting her anger, Lan Sha's heart finally calmed down. Then, she had a complicated expression on her face. I was about to forget, but this damned guy still dared to do this to me. Phew, do you really think I won't kill you? Fine, you asked for it this time. Don't blame me. She clenched her teeth and was about to open the curtain to give an order. But when she touched the curtain, she suddenly stopped. Should I wait? Yes, that guy deserves to die, but... Oh, I haven't made the telescope yet. If I make a move now, wouldn't it be too easy for him? No, I can't be soft-hearted this time. I am the future Northern Wilderness Empress. How can I be unclear with the brand? Once this matter spreads, what should I do? Suddenly, she clutched her head and screamed a few times. She quickly brushed her long hair and waved her hand. The teacup on the short table in front of her flew out and hit the inner wall of the carriage. Bang! The tiles shattered and tea splashed everywhere. There was a sudden silence in the car. Lan Sha lowered his head and looked expressionlessly at the trickling blood on his palm. He finally regained his senses. Andre's anxious voice came from outside the car. Your Highness, are you all right? It's fine. Lan Sha's expression was cold as he flung away the blood that had already seeped out. He took out a white silk handkerchief and wrapped it around the wound. He clenched his teeth and said indifferently, Pass down my order. The original order for the guards to withdraw is canceled. In addition, when we return, invite the 2 guest elders of the clan to come over. They must keep an eye on Arthur. Yes. Andre was obviously a little confused, but he still obeyed the order. Kill, to kill, or not to kill. It was only a matter of time, but since he had already made his decision, Lan Sha was never one to drag his feet. He knew that the situation just now had been seen by Lambert, and that it would be difficult to resolve this matter peacefully. He could only strengthen the guards around Tang Yin. I'll give you one more chance, one last time, Lan Sha said with certainty as he caressed the wound on his hand. He paused and frowned. However, he seems a little abnormal today. Lan Sha was still Lan Sha after all. Earlier, He was only flustered because of the sudden, forceful kiss that evoked many unbearable memories. Once he calmed down, he immediately noticed that Tang En's actions were abnormal today. He felt that something was wrong. He silently recalled Tang En's words and actions just now, and his powerful and meticulous mind began to analyze them one by one. First, why did he suddenly become so enthusiastic about killing Lambert? Moreover, this was obviously a little impulsive, completely inconsistent with his usual mischievous personality. Moreover, his reaction to his suggestion of arranging for two of the clan's foreign dignitaries was to acquiesce on the spot. It was impossible for him not to know the meaning behind it, even though it was indeed something that could not be rejected. However, he had agreed too readily. He did not even try to bargain. Why was that? Also, why did he ask him to apologize to Lambert? It had to be said that Lan Sha was terrifying when he calmed down. Under such an overly detailed analysis, Tang En's previous abnormalities were quickly discovered, and there was nowhere to hide. He wanted to run, and it was just a few days ago, so he acted like he didn't care. Very quickly, Lan Sha narrowed his eyes and came to this conclusion. If he wanted to run, then the first problem he had to solve was her delicate body instantly trembled, and her left hand quickly reached for her waist. Only when she touched a small, protruding object did her heart calm down slightly. She lowered her head and pinched out the half-wolf jade pendant with her jade fingers. She exhaled lightly and immediately stuffed the jade pendant back. Strange. The jade pendant was still there, so the previous conclusion was undoubtedly overturned. But what about the other suspicious points? Was there something else that she hadn't thought of? While Lan Sha was deep in thought, outside, Andre had already dispersed the Imperial Guard that had just gathered and sent them back to their original positions. He then returned to ask for instructions, and the carriage started to return to the palace castle. About halfway back, Lan Sha, who was deep in thought, was awakened by the faint sound of an explosion in the distance. He frowned and lifted the curtain of the carriage, and saw the figures of the Imperial Guards not far away, looking very hurried. "What's going on?" "Your Highness, please wait a moment." Andre, who was beside him, immediately urged his horse to go investigate. After a few minutes, he quickly returned and reported, "Your Highness, the sound of explosions came from the west side of the city. I heard that there have been a few explosions since this morning. Fortunately, the explosions weren't too powerful, so there weren't many casualties." "Explosions? Do you know what caused them?" Lan Sha asked. He shook his head. "I haven't investigated it yet. The explosions were strange, and most of the victims were civilians walking on the streets. It didn't seem like someone deliberately did it. Besides, other than some strange pottery shards, there was nothing else found at the scene." With such limited information, even Lan Sha couldn't analyze it. So after hearing this, he just nodded slightly, put down the curtain, and didn't think too much about it. When they arrived at the inner gate of the palace castle, Lan Sha had just gotten off the carriage when he bumped into the Empress, who was passing by. "It's Lan Sha. That brand's matter. HM, what happened to your hand?" Pausing, the Empress glanced at the blood-red scarf wrapped around Lan Sha's right hand, and her face darkened. After a simple salute, Lan Sha shook his head with a calm expression. "It's nothing. I accidentally broke a teacup." "Oh." The Empress heard this, and her expression softened. Just as she was about to say something, her gaze fell on Lan Sha's lips again, and her eyes couldn't help but shrink. Without waiting for her to ask, Lan Sha took the initiative to wave his hand. "This is HM. I accidentally bumped into a wall." The Empress nodded slightly and said non-committally, "You really were careless when you went out this time. Maybe it's not good to go out today." Fortunately, nothing happened. Lan Sha's heart suddenly moved, and he asked, "Mother, do you still have that jade pendant on you?" There were many kinds of jade pendants, and with the Empress's identity, there were even more. However, after Lan Sha asked, both of them knew which one it was. After hesitating, the Empress said, "Yes. Can I take a look?" The Empress heard this and frowned slightly. She fixed her gaze on Lan Sha's and slowly nodded. Without asking for the reason, She took out the jade pendant from her waist and handed it over. She always wears it. Seeing this, Lan Shah's eyes flashed slightly, and he pursed his lips. After receiving the jade pendant, he placed it in the center of his palm. The jade pendant was carved in the shape of a giant wolf howling at the sky, smooth and smooth. Obviously, it was because he often played with it. It was indeed the half-wolf jade pendant. Seeing this, Lan Shah couldn't help but feel relieved. Although it still didn't answer the doubts in his heart, he was sure that his previous conclusion was indeed overthinking. After returning the jade pendant and chatting for a while, Lan Shah said goodbye to the Empress and went back to treat his wounds. Seeing Lan Shah's figure disappear, the Empress's expression suddenly became serious. She took a deep breath and said, "Serene, go and ask Lan Shah about his whereabouts just now. See if he went to find that Arthur." Selene's thin eyebrows raised slightly. "You suspect that it was that brand? Oomph. No one else has the guts." The Empress snorted coldly, and the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Ran into a wall. It's really amazing that she could come up with such a lame excuse. Huh? Selene couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. She also shook her head rather speechlessly. This kind of excuse was okay to coax children. Although Lan Shah was smarter than most people, he really didn't have much experience in this area. Naturally, he didn't know how ridiculous his excuse was. After Selene left quietly, the Empress raised her head and looked into the distance for a while. She narrowed her eyes, flicked her sleeves, and left. For his sake, I didn't want to pursue this matter. But now it seems that I have to give you a taste of pain. Chapter 682. In the evening, on the busiest street in the great wilderness city, there was an endless stream of people and carriages. The imperial city was still the imperial city. Even in the northern wilderness, where business was obviously lagging behind, one could still see the prosperity in this absolute center of economy and royal power. As for this street, it was needless to say, even in the capital of the brand, it wouldn't be much inferior. Currently, in a brightly lit area in the middle of the street, in front of a magnificent building that occupied a large area, there were luxurious carriages stopping one after another. Those who alighted from the carriages were all dignitaries dressed in obviously expensive clothes. They looked around. If they saw someone they knew, they would wave and greet them, showing the connections they had painstakingly built. From the situation, it was needless to say that a grand banquet was being held here, and the standard was very high. That was indeed the case. Putting aside the specific content of the banquet, just from the host, Tiger, the successor of the Hidden Snake tribe, it was clear that this banquet was definitely not low class. Anyone with a high ranking in the city would gladly attend as long as they receive an invitation. At this time, the banquet was about to start. At this stage, those who came late would not be simple people. Some rules would not change no matter where they were. For example, the important people would always be the last to appear and receive the crowd's applause. Right at this moment, an ordinary carriage with a black canopy slowly drove over. It looked extremely shabby in this place. The coachman was a stout young man for Bran. It was obvious that he was very nervous at this time. He held the reins tightly, and sweat covered his forehead. He was afraid that the skinny old horse in front of the carriage would suddenly go crazy and crash into something. Fortunately, nothing happened in the end. The carriage smoothly stopped at the intersection in front of the grand building. As soon as the carriage stopped, the dignitaries around all frowned. Those who were self-conscious only glanced at it a few times. Those who were less shrewd whispered to each other and wondered if the carriage had come to the wrong place. The car door opened, and a brand young man dressed in ordinary black clothes with an ordinary face jumped out of the car. He looked up at the luxurious building in front of him and couldn't help but grin. He muttered to himself, "Little girl, you are so cruel. Not only did you not come to pick me up, you even didn't give me the clothes that we agreed on in advance. I really despise you." Needless to say, this young man was naturally Tang In. Just as he said, Lan Shah might have been irritated by his actions in the afternoon. The luxurious clothes, carriage, and so on that he had promised were all canceled. As a result, he could only maintain his true colors and borrow Matthew's carriage and coachman to successfully come here. Turning around, Tang In patted the coachman's shoulder. "All right, you can stop here. Thank you." Sir, there's no need to be so polite." The sturdy driver was clearly a man of few words. After stuttering for a long time, he nervously saluted in response. Tang didn't show any impatience when he saw this. He just smiled and said, "You go back first. By the way, pass a message to Elder Ma. Tell him not to forget the wooden box. Oh, if possible, inform more Brand compatriots and tell them not to go out tonight." "Yes." After waving his hand, Tang turned around and walked straight to the door of the building. At this time, the dignitaries around also reacted. It was not unusual to see a Brand in the Imperial City, but to appear here tonight, it could only be him, Arthur. Looking at Tang In, who looked indifferent and walked forward slowly, the dignitaries around couldn't help but look at each other. Is this a good relationship with the royal family? Has an unclear relationship with His Highness Lan Shah, the Brand who had stirred up a storm in the Imperial City in the past few days and caused unrest? He looks very ordinary. However, no matter how much the crowd disagreed in their hearts, given the attitude of the royal family and the fierce reputation of this Brand, there wouldn't be any idiots who would come up to look for trouble. Of course, it was impossible to go up and try to make friends. After all, the attitude of the fierce eagle tribe was not clear, yet stay at a respectful distance. Or to put it bluntly, it was to completely ignore him and act as if they didn't see him, so as to avoid getting into trouble. Tang glanced a few times and roughly understood the situation. He shrugged indifferently. It just so happened that he had some peace and quiet, so naturally he didn't mind. Walking alone through the main door of the magnificent building, he passed through a short corridor. What entered his eyes was a spacious hall. The inside of this majestic building had been hollowed out, and it was designed in the style of a building within a building. On the left and right sides of the hall were white jade stairs leading to the second floor. They were arched and magnificent. There was no need to talk about the various luxurious decorations in the hall. It was enough to let a poor family live without worry for food and clothing for a long time if any of the inconspicuous things were taken out and sold. Wine and meat stink behind the red door. Frozen bones lie on the road. This sentence, no matter which time and space it was, would not be just for show. At a glance, the hall was bustling with noise and clamor. Other than a few main characters, most of the guests invited to this banquet should have already arrived. After Tang came in, the reaction of the people around him was exactly the same as the people outside. At first, they were stunned, then they understood. Then, they quietly retreated and whispered, "This is that Brand, right?" "That's right. His name is Arthur. F***CK. Put your hand down, don't point blindly. This person's temper is not good. It's best not to provoke him." Obviously, he was not convinced. Pointing is not enough? Does he dare to hit me here? Smiling bitterly, he really dares. Don't forget, this is someone who even dares to hit someone from the fierce eagle tribe, and even broke 5 of his fingers, After hesitating, he did not dare to raise his arm in the end, but he was still angry. A Brand. F***CK. This is so F***king frustrating. Enough. No matter who he is, as long as he has the protection of the royal family, we can only stay away. What about the fierce eagle tribe? Are they just going to let it go? Fierce eagle tribe, huh? Chuckling and shaking his head, as if he was disdainful, he pointed at the hall in front of him. What do you think the purpose of Tiger from the Hidden Snake tribe is holding this banquet? Just wait and see. The final result will definitely be that Brand apologizing, Lambert accepting, and both sides will take a step back and let it go. F***CKU. Similar conversations like this kept ringing in the hall. Gazes of fear, disdain, resentment, and so on were cast from various hidden angles. Of course, these people were conversing in the man language to avoid being overheard and causing trouble. However, what they did not know was that Tang Un's current man language level was even higher than that of pure northern wilderness people like them. After all, there were rare words in every language but Tang In now seemed to have swallowed an entire dictionary into his brain, not missing a single word. Although he heard all kinds of slander, Tang In was not in the mood to pay attention to it. He just frowned slightly and silently estimated the time. He glanced at the door from the corner of his eye, secretly anxious that Lan Sha and the others had not arrived yet. That's right, Tang In really did want to run, and tonight at that. The reason he came to this banquet at this time was to avoid the sight of the 4 guests sent by Lan Sha. These 4 guests of the royal family were not weak. If they fought one-on-one, Tang In was confident that he could kill them all. However, if the 4 of them attacked together, Tang In would be able to protect himself, but it would be very difficult for him to escape. Fortunately, these guests usually only acted as guards and protected him in the dark. They could not swagger into a banquet of upper-class nobles like this one. However, although Tang In was out of their sight, they were actually very close to each other. If there were no special disturbances, they could arrive in an instant. Tang In's countermeasure was very simple. He would find an opportunity to assassinate Lan Sha, Tiger, and other important people during the banquet. Of course, he did not really want to kill them, so he did not have to go to that extent. As long as he forced the guests to show up to protect him, Tang In's goal of escaping would be achieved. Holding a wine glass, Tang In slowly walked to the corner of the hall. He carefully went through the plan from beginning to end again in his mind. After confirming that there were no major omissions, he nodded slightly and let out a long sigh of relief. His footsteps paused, and he obediently sat at the table in the corner with pastries, meat slices, fruits, and wine. He raised his knife and fork. Yes, if everything went smoothly, he would probably starve for the next few days. He would eat as much as he could now. Chapter 683. Just as Tang In was eating heartily as if no one else was around, and the nobles around him were secretly mocking him, whoosh, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly changed. At the main entrance, a cold-looking, well-dressed Lan Sha slowly walked into the hall, accompanied by a feminine-looking young man. "Your Highness, good evening." "Greetings, Your Highness." "Haha, niece Lan Sha. Long time no see." Amidst the rising and falling voices, the people around him greeted him according to their status and relationship, some simple, some grand, some intimate, some casual, and some serious. Tang In didn't go over. He kept stuffing food into his mouth while glancing through the gaps in the crowd from time to time. Lan Sha's lips were obviously covered with a light pink gloss. If one didn't look closely, it would be difficult to see the bite marks. Haha, quite cunning. Seeing this, Tang In couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. At this time, Lan Sha, who was looking around, glanced over and met Tang In's gaze when he responded to the greetings. It was just a brief glance, and then he looked away as if he hadn't seen anything. He walked up the stairs to the 2nd floor, surrounded by some nobles of high status. There weren't any written rules, but under the established rules, everyone knew that the stairs to the 2nd floor weren't to be casually stepped on. If one's status wasn't high enough, going up there would only bring shame to oneself. Seeing Lan Sha disappear from the 2nd floor without looking back, Tang In pursed his lips. For some reason, he suddenly felt a faint sourness in his heart, just a little. It should be because I ate too many sour fruits. With this thought, Tang In expressionlessly reached out and forked a piece of dessert. Although the distinguished Lan Sha had arrived, the banquet still hadn't officially started. The reason was simple. As most people knew, this banquet was held by the royal family to support Tang In and resolve the conflict between him and Lambit. Now that Lambit, one of the parties involved, wasn't present, the banquet naturally wouldn't start. However, perhaps in order to prevent the atmosphere from cooling down, a group of beautiful young women with voluptuous figures, dressed only in white gauze, swayed gracefully into the open space at the side of the hall. The sound of stringed and woodwind music rang out, and the women danced to it. Her gauze swayed gently, her movements were slow, and her posture was extremely charming. Her towering chest trembled like a ripe peach on the verge of falling. Her private parts were faintly discernible under the veil, which was extremely tempting. Along with the enchanting dance of these women, the surrounding people, especially the young aristocrats, quickly gathered over. Their gazes were burning, and they whistled from time to time. The atmosphere in the hall quickly became lively. As mentioned before, in the northern wilderness tribes, the status of women was generally low. Therefore, unlike Bran's party, where both men and women were equally present, most of the people here were men of all ages, and very few women could be seen. As for men, no matter how old they were, their desire to possess young and beautiful women would never change. Moreover, in contrast to Bran, who was half-hidden and focused on the atmosphere, the men in the northern wilderness were much more open and direct towards women. Therefore, after this group of women came in, the northern wilderness nobles who were holding crystal goblets and trying their best to pretend to be elegant instantly revealed their true colors. Of course, in such an occasion, these nobles wouldn't really do anything. They would just feast their eyes, and at most they would whistle. Tang was also a man, so while stuffing himself with food, he also took some time to take a few glances. He knew the identities of these women. He had heard of them in Bran, but he didn't expect to see them with his own eyes in the northern wilderness. Fox girls from the Charmed Fox tribe. According to Tang's knowledge, the Charmed Fox tribe with a unique existence in the northern wilderness. It wasn't because of their strength. In fact, the Charmed Fox tribe's combat strength was famous for being weak. They should be at the bottom of the thousands of tribes in the northern wilderness. As for the reason, the people in the northern wilderness were born with strong physiques. This was a publicly acknowledged fact, and it was also the reason why they survived in this bitter cold land. However, there were always exceptions. There were also some people in the northern wilderness whose physiques were no different from the Bran, such as the Hidden Snake tribe and the Charmed Fox tribe. The difference was that although the people in the Hidden Snake tribe had average physiques, their combat strength wasn't weak. Their elite troop, the Serpentis Guard, was a terrifying existence. In comparison, the people in the Charmed Fox tribe were much weaker. Not only were their physiques weak, but their training couldn't increase their strength by much. They were like patients. Logically speaking, under the cruel rule of survival of the fittest in the northern wilderness, a tribe like this should have been eliminated without a doubt. However, this wasn't the case. As the saying went, when the heavens closed a door, they would open another window. Although the Charmed Fox tribe's combat strength was close to zero, no matter if it was a man or a woman, they were all famous for being beautiful. Not to mention being ugly. Even being normal was rare. It was also because of this that they found a way to survive in the northern wilderness, which was to marry other tribes. It had to be said that as long as the world's values were still present, handsome men and beautiful women would always be welcomed. None of the people in the northern wilderness, especially the tribe leaders, would refuse to have a fox girl as a concubine, as long as they could promise to protect the Charmed Fox tribe. Then they could smoothly marry the fox girl they liked. The Charmed Fox tribe relied on this method to be like a vine, firmly clinging onto the other tribes in the northern wilderness, forming an enormous force that couldn't be increased. Although they weren't looked down upon normally, to be honest, no one dared to provoke them. This is the so-called core competitiveness, the so-called export. Looking at these beautiful fox girls, Tang raised his eyebrows and thought to himself. Then he had a thought and looked up. Next to the white jade railing on the second floor, Lan Sha crossed his arms in front of his chest, expressionless as he looked over with a cold gaze. Looking at each other, Lan Sha suddenly rolled his eyes and turned his head away rather arrogantly, his expression extremely disdainful. Damn, did I provoke you? Tang looked around his body in confusion. Everything was normal. He was instantly enraged and immediately raised his head to glare back at him. However, at this moment, Lan Sha's gaze suddenly froze, and he frowned as he looked to the right. Tang also noticed that the atmosphere in the hall had suddenly become noisy, so he turned his head to look. The vulture-eyed, hook-nosed Lambit, who was dressed in black leather, stepped into the hall. He looked around and instantly saw Lan Sha standing on the second floor. Lambit nodded reluctantly, his expression slightly gloomy. He retracted his gaze and didn't respond to the noble's greetings. Instead, he pushed through the crowd and walked up the stairs to the second floor. It's finally here. Tangan took a deep breath, stood up, and put down his knife and fork. He slowly calmed the waves in his heart, and his gaze gradually became cold and indifferent. Tangan didn't care how Lambert would react after seeing the scene in the laboratory, because it was obvious that Lambert wouldn't directly overturn the results of his 2 days of negotiations with Lan Shah. Therefore, the following process wouldn't change. He would still apologize to Lambert under the witness of Lan Shah and the others, and that would be the best time to create a disturbance. Just as Tangan was going through the plan for the last time, the surrounding crowd suddenly let out short gasps of surprise. The people nearby retreated while the people further away gathered here. Looking up, he saw Lambert, who had just walked up the stairs to the second floor, suddenly turn around and walk over. The people on both sides quickly retreated like the tide, their dark gazes fixed on him. Vaguely, there was a murderous intent that was almost uncontrollable. The surrounding people naturally knew about the conflict between the two. Seeing Lambert suddenly turn around, they couldn't be bothered to look at the seductive fox girl anymore. They all rushed over excitedly. On the second floor, Lan Shah and Tiger's expressions changed. This was different from what they discussed earlier. What was Lambert trying to do? However, no matter how anxious Lan Shah was, she couldn't jump down from the second floor now, so she couldn't stop him in time. The atmosphere gradually froze. Lambert stepped in front of Tang Han. He was very close. His gaze was sinister and sharp, giving off an almost tangible sense of oppression. Tang En stood quietly, his expression indifferent. His brows were slightly furrowed. In the eyes of the surrounding people, it was naturally a forced awe and fear. However, they didn't know that he was troubled. Troubled by Lambert's actions, Lan Shah and the others were still far away, making it difficult for him to carry out his plan. After a moment of silence, just as Lan Shah and Tiger quickly walked down the stairs, Lambert said stiffly, "Didn't you want to apologize?" Hearing that, the surrounding people were stunned. They couldn't help but lose their spirits. They couldn't help but curse in their hearts. F***CK. They thought there was going to be a good show. They didn't expect him to apologize in the end. Tang and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Then, he looked at the stupefied Lambert and nodded slowly. He bowed slightly. "I'm sorry. I apologize for this incident." Hearing that, Lambert's sinister eyes narrowed. He suddenly bent down and whispered in Tang Un's ear, "Leaguli ba." He spoke in an unclear northern wilderness language very quickly. His voice wasn't loud, but made the people closest to him tremble violently. After a few seconds, Lambert straightened his back. His expression was calm as he translated, "I accept your apology." Wow! Hearing that, the surrounding people couldn't help but discuss in low voices. It was natural for them to be disappointed. This should be the end of this matter. However, they didn't notice that the people closest to them in the inner circle were standing there in a daze, their expressions blank. They also didn't notice that Tangan's long and narrow eyes were narrowed. They were as sharp as a knife. Lambert didn't expect Tang En to know the northern wilderness language. Moreover, he was very proficient in it. The original meaning of that sentence in a northern wilderness language was clearly, "Bastard Bran, you're dead. When you leave this banquet, you'll definitely die." Tang En slowly raised his head and met Lambert's mocking gaze. The corners of his mouth curled up. "Oh!" As soon as he finished speaking, he casually took a step forward. Whoosh! An overwhelming, murderous aura instantly enveloped the entire hall. All the silver candlesticks around him bent at the same time, and the hall instantly darkened. He raised his hand and slapped out. Bang! Everyone felt a sudden gust of wind in front of them. Their eyes unconsciously narrowed. When they opened their eyes again, there was only Tang in front of them. Lan Shah and Tiger, who were halfway down the stairs, stopped in their tracks. They were in the outer circle and didn't feel the gust of wind. They only saw Lambert's figure whirling and flying rapidly over everyone's heads. In just a short moment, he had traversed hundreds of feet and crashed into the stone wall on the right side of the hall. Boom! It was as if thunder had exploded in the hall, and the ground beneath his feet trembled slightly. Lambert was stuck to the wall with his arms and legs spread out. His back didn't move at all, and he looked like a sculpture on the wall. Lansha blinked and instinctively turned his head stiffly. He saw Tang, and looking at him and spreading his hands. It feels so good to slap someone. Chapter 684. Lansha and Tiger on the stairs. The nobles who were stiffly turning their heads in the hall. The vixen who was frozen in a difficult dance pose. And the guest elders who were hidden outside the hall, but were constantly paying attention to what was happening. At this moment, silence, dead silence. No one's brain could function normally. They stared blankly at Lambert, who was plastered on the wall like a decoration. Their minds were blank. Perhaps they had guessed before. There were only two possibilities. One, this Bran who was lucky enough to be protected by the royal family would lower himself and apologize to Lambert. He might be humiliated, but this matter would be over. Two, this Bran couldn't take the humiliation and chose to fall out with Lambert. Then both sides would fight again. Finally, the royal family would lose patience and retreat. Then, this Bran would disappear without a trace. That was probably the case. To sum it up in one sentence, one could survive if they didn't want to, but death was the only outcome. It should be said that they guessed the beginning correctly. Tang did apologize to Lambert, and Lambert did threaten and humiliate Tang. Unfortunately, they didn't guess the ending correctly. To be honest, this ending was purely coincidental. From the beginning to the end, Tang's plan did not include killing Lambert. This was because it would not benefit him at all, and it might even cause a change in the plan. But it had happened just like that, and it couldn't be any more obvious. Who was to blame? If one had to blame someone, it was Lambert's fault for seeing Tang before going upstairs. He couldn't suppress his murderous rage and walked over. It was also his arrogance that caused him to reveal the dangerous follow-up plan in a way he thought was obscure. Of course, Tang was even more to blame for being able to master the Northern Wilderness language with the help of the system in just a few days. Killing Lambert might cause a change in the plan, but if he didn't kill Lambert, Tang would be in danger at any time. There would definitely be changes in the plan. As such, the choice that Tang had to make was self-evident. And so, the tragedy happened. A high-pitched scream came from a vixen. This meant that pure fear was the most direct emotion. It could always suppress things like wisdom, reason, and so on, and vent them out immediately. At the same time, with a bang, Tang pressed the table next to him, and the cutlery and plates flew into the air. His palm was like a phantom as he gently waved his hand. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The silver cutlery reflected a cold luster and flashed with a blood-red light as it shot through the air, heading straight for Lansha and Tiger on the stairs. Everyone came back to their senses after hearing the loud screams, but no one was able to stop the knives and forks that tore through the air. But at this moment, suddenly, how dare you? Thunder roared, and the candles in the hall trembled. A few green silhouettes suddenly appeared out of thin air and chased after the knives and forks. Lansha seemed to have received too much of shock. He stood there in a daze and did not dodge at all. On the side, Tiger clearly didn't think too much. Seeing that the knife and fork were about to hit him, his expression changed drastically. Knowing that it was too late to dodge, he hurriedly punched out. Bang, bang, bang. The silver cutlery and forks were crushed into pieces by the various powerful forces. The masters who appeared later finally arrived at the critical moment and successfully removed the threat. Lansha wasn't hurt. Tiger, on the other hand, didn't manage to hit the knives and forks because of his panic. Instead, a fork stabbed into his fist. With a muffled grunt, his feminine face turned as pale as paper. Just then, something happened again. With a scream, a few figures suddenly glided through the air, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. They were the nobles of the Northern Wilderness. Needless to say, they were being thrown here as targets. Whoosh! Finally, everyone in the hall came back to their senses. They screamed and roared. Those who thought they were strong instantly got into position to prevent anyone from approaching. Those who were weak ran around like headless flies. In a short moment, the hall was filled with people running in all directions. It was a complete mess. Damn it! The Northern Baron Territory experts who were about to arrive had just caught the few nobles who were flying in the air. They looked around, and their faces turned pale. They could only see the chaotic figures, but there was no sign of the brand. They wanted to chase after him, but looking at the chaos, they were afraid that he would hide and come back, threatening Lan Shah and Tiger's safety again. They were in a dilemma. After weighing the pros and cons, they could only stay where they were. After all, compared to catching the brand, Lan Shah and Tiger's safety was undoubtedly more important. Close the door. Close the door. Everyone, stay where you are. Don't panic, quiet. Shut the F***CK up. The chaotic situation lasted for about 5 minutes before the hall quieted down a little. Naturally, the hall was now a mess. It was no longer as grand as before. Fortunately, in the midst of the chaos, no one knew who did it, but the door was finally closed. Even so, the masters' faces were still as dark as the bottom of a pot. After such a long time, even a child would have run out, let alone a skilled person. At this moment, a young master's voice rang out. "Young master." A few cries of despair echoed in the hall. Everyone turned around instinctively and saw a few elders digging Lambit out of the wall. They were the masters of the Wild Eagle tribe who were responsible for protecting Lambit. They had been in the side hall like the guest masters of the other tribes. They didn't expect their young master to be slammed into the wall in just a few breaths. He's probably dead, everyone thought as they looked at Lambit, who was stuck in the wall. They couldn't help but shudder. If these people could tell, the masters could too, and they were even more accurate. They knew very well what would happen if someone was slammed into the wall with such strength. They couldn't help but feel even more hopeless. As expected, when they flipped Lambit over, everyone present couldn't help but gasp. A chill ran from their tailbones to their brains. Their entire bodies went numb. This tragic scene would definitely appear in their nightmares and accompany them for the rest of their lives. Lambit. Oh, if they hadn't known beforehand, no one would have recognized that this lump of minced meat was the son of Raging Shadow, Lambit. His body was as soft as noodles, and he couldn't even lift himself up. It was as if all his bones had been smashed into powder. His appearance couldn't be distinguished from the front anymore. From head to toe, he was a mass of mangled flesh and blood. Occasionally, there were bone fragments mixed in, making him look even more terrifying. Needless to say, he couldn't be more dead. In reality, Lambit was already dead the moment he was slapped. He was lucky that he didn't feel any pain after that. A Wild Eagle tribe master raised his head and roared with bloodshot eyes at Lan Shah. "It's all because of you. Otherwise, how could our young master die? That damn brand bastard is a member of your royal family. You're all in cahoots. My Wild Eagle tribe will definitely pursue this matter to the end and get an explanation." **T. The masters protecting Lan Shah were instantly enraged. "Are you King blind? Didn't you see him attack His Highness just now? If we hadn't acted in time, His Highness would have been killed." The Wild Eagle tribe elder was at a loss for words. He opened his mouth and said angrily, "He's someone your royal family wants to protect. Anyway, you can't escape responsibility for this." As the host of this banquet, Tiger naturally couldn't escape responsibility for this matter. Just as he was having a headache, he saw that both sides were about to fight. He quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "Let's not talk about this for now. The most important thing now is to catch that brand and avenge Brother Lambit. Otherwise, if we delay any longer, I'm afraid he'll escape the Imperial City." That bastard can't escape." With a cold snort, the Wild Eagle tribe elder didn't waste any more words. He and a few others picked up Lambit's corpse and rushed out of the door murderously, disappearing in an instant. Seeing this, the nobles looked at each other. They knew that this matter was serious and didn't dare to stay any longer. They all waved their hands and bid farewell. At this point, A perfectly good banquet had come to an end before it even started. At this moment, Lon Shah, who was in a daze, seemed to wake up from a dream. He looked at the crowd that was leaving continuously, then turned to look at the human-shaped hole in the wall. As if he had thought of something, he slowly reached into his waist and took out a half-wolf jade pendant. He lowered his head and rubbed it, then suddenly clenched his fist. Crack! With a crisp sound, he opened his palm. The jade pendant was already in pieces, but other than some powder, there was nothing else. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.